Good Monday afternoon and welcome to the first 580 Sports Talk of the work week. Brendan Dworzynski and Dan Lucero here with you for the next 3 hours. Thank you so much for swinging by and hanging out with us on this Monday afternoon. We've got a busy day coming up for you. The Royals in action. How about that? A little spring training baseball. We'll talk some Royals a little bit later on in the show today.
They are a Cactus League wagon, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Just thrashing the competition.
Nicky Lopez just picked up an RBI as well. Good for Nicky Lopez before he gets traded to the White Sox. That's a joke, but maybe not. So we'll talk some Royals a little bit later on today as we get closer and closer to opening day. I think I saw that we're 31 days away from opening day today.
Something like that.
Yeah, so that's exciting for sure. We've got plenty of college basketball to get to. KU narrowly gets by West Virginia. That game was stressful, but now their magic number is one win, and they will, or a Texas loss for what it's worth, would give KU at least a share of the Big 12 championship. That is pretty darn cool after an unbelievable year in the Big 12. K-State, meanwhile, picked up a very impressive win over Oklahoma State on the road this weekend. They are in line right now to get a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. That is unbelievable in a good way. The best way possible. That is almost completely unbelievable. So we'll get to both of those games coming up in the 4 o'clock hour today. We've got some Chiefs to talk about as well. Matt Verderame, our NFL insider, is going to join us bottom of this hour. Some interesting professional news from Matt today that we will chat about with him coming up when he jumps on the show with us. We've also got the What Is Wrong With You semifinals today. Our 4 semifinalists for the month: the Chicken Wing Embezzler, Grand Theft Garbage, the TNT Teacher, and the Definitely Not Dead Diagnosis. Strong month.
It was a remarkable month of February.
Really, really strong month. Almost all of those stories went wire to wire, too.
Yeah.
I think the Chicken Wing Embezzler was a Tuesday or Wednesday story that was the short week to open the week, but it still went the entire length. So some really strong early week stories that made it all the way to the end of the month. We'll find our monthly winner coming up here in over the next 2 days. We've also got our 580 Sports Talk headlines. We've got some Monday night best bets for you. We'll recap the weekend with the good, the bad, and the ugly. It is all coming up here on 580 Sports Talk today. We would love for you to be a part of the show. As always, you can text in on the Big O Tires text line. 785-272-9429 is the text line number. And, of course, you can chime in on YouTube as well. Our YouTube live stream can be found on our channel, Sports on 580 WIBW. Make sure that you are going and checking it out. We've got all of our live streams there, game recaps, so much more. Again, our channel is Sports on 580 WIBW. Wanted to get to the Kansas City Chiefs to lead off today. And we spoke a lot last week about some of the positions that are going to be debated a lot or are going to be interesting, curious, whatever adjective you want to use throughout this offseason, at least up until the start of free agency and then when the draft rolls around at the end of April. And the offensive tackle came up. And specifically last week, I was talking about Orlando Brown and his situation, and should the Chiefs extend him long term? Do you just do the franchise tag for another year? Do you tag and trade? What do you do with him? But in reality, their entire tackle group, I think, is of particular interest because your 2 starting tackles are both free agents. Orlando Brown on the left, Andrew Wiley on the right. And going into the year, you probably would have said, man, if we're talking about re-signing Andrew Wiley, things probably went horribly wrong.
Or horribly right.
Yeah, like unbelievably right. And it's much closer to the latter than to the former. He played solidly over the course of the year, was very good in the playoffs, very good in the Super Bowl, and he was a steady part of this Chiefs starting 5 on the offensive line. Orlando Brown, obviously, we went over the ups and downs of his early part of the season, but he was very consistent in the back half of the year, was sensational in the Super Bowl and throughout the playoffs. Couldn't have really asked for much more from him down the stretch. So the Chiefs are in an interesting spot here where I guess theoretically you have a couple guys waiting in the wings. You could say, yeah, they could play tackle. We've had Lucas Niang on the roster for a few years now. Sure, that could work. We drafted Darian Kennard last year. He was the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Year. Sure. But do you want to do that? Do you want to push two guys who have barely played, one who's been injured and out of shape, one who wasn't even on the active roster for more than, one game all season this year, and say, yep, you're our two starting tackles? Or do you hit the free agent market, as we went over last week, and say, wow, there is nothing here. The best we can do is try to trade for Caleb McGarry because he's going to get tagged by the Atlanta Falcons. Like, that's the best we can do on the market. You try to trade for someone, but you probably aren't getting a sweetheart deal like you got from the Ravens to get Orlando Brown 2 years ago. It's an interesting situation for the Chiefs, and you saw this, Dan, today from Bill Barnwell at ESPN, who's, I think, the best NFL writer, national perspective guy in the game. So many good insights on different things and a great mix of tape and analysis and numbers and metrics and all of that. And he said that in his column today was one move for every team in the AFC to make. And he wrote about the tackles for the Chiefs. You don't often have that situation. I probably didn't give enough attention last week to Andrew Wiley that, hey, by the way, you need to figure out what you're doing at right tackle as well. Someone might be paying him a buttload of money this offseason because everybody needs offensive line help. Everybody in the league needs offensive line help. Someone is probably going to overpay him. I wouldn't hate if it ended up being the Chiefs, but I'm at a point where I feel like you can't lose both of them.
So the player that Barnwell compares him to in his article at ESPN.com today is La'el Collins, who hit the free agent market last offseason and got 3 years and $21 million from a very offensive line needy team in Cincinnati. Two questions. Do you think Andrew Wiley is the caliber of offensive lineman that La'el Collins is? And do you think that he will command a similar contract? I think the answer to the second one is probably connected to your answer to the first question.
Yeah.
But I'll ask you that right back, Brendan. Do you think he's the caliber player, La'el Collins?
No, I don't. I think now I don't think there is a gulf between the two.
Sure.
I don't think we're talking,
if you're just picking one, like if you're choosing sides on the sandlot and it's time to pick a right tackle and those are your two options, are you taking Collins or are you taking Wiley?
I would take Collins.
I'd probably lean Collins.
Yeah, I think that's the way to answer it. It's a little bit of a hedge, but if you got your pick of one, who do you want to be for the next 3 years, your right tackle? I would take La'el Collins. But if you were picking second in that snake draft and, we ended up with Andrew Wiley, you probably wouldn't be upset about it.
So with that in mind, 3 years, $21 million is what Collins got from the Bengals last year. Do you think Wiley commands something similar? Do you think there's a 3-year deal, $6 to $8 million a year out there for Andrew Wiley on the free agent market? The reason I think there might be is because historically, and we've discussed this, the free agent market is very friendly to players who have been role players on the Super Bowl champions.
Mm-hmm.
When you win a title, you've got it's like the bonus package when you're buying a car, right? Like you buy a car, you buy the stock, the floor model, or you can buy the car with like the really nice wheels. So you can buy the one with like the satellite radio package already in it, and all of those little accoutrements. A Super Bowl ring is a nice accoutrement with which to hit the free agent market. And Andrew Wiley hitting the free agent market, not just with a ring, but with a stellar performance in the game, being one of the guys that everybody was talking about coming out of the Chiefs Super Bowl win over the Eagles. That, I think, sets him up in better shape than he might have been otherwise had the Chiefs not won the Super Bowl, or had they just been a team that lost in the playoffs, or had he been the exact same player in a different circumstance. I think him having contributed to a Super Bowl run probably has him more on demand on the market. So I do think he's going to get something along the lines. I'm not peering into a crystal ball here, but I think that's about reasonable. Something like 2 to 3 years, something like 6 to 8 million average annual value. The question for the Chiefs is they don't have a ton of guys they need to pay this year. Would it be worth it to keep Andrew Wiley around? Here's why I think not only might the Chiefs find it wise to keep Wiley, but also will find it wise to figure out that long-term contract extension with Orlando Brown. If the Chiefs have learned anything in the last 2 years, it's that investment in the offensive line pays off big time. when they lost Super Bowl 55 to the Buccaneers, that offseason was all about making sure that what happened to Patrick Mahomes in that game never happened to him again.
Right.
And they traded the first-round pick for Orlando Brown. And they spent big money on a guard. That's a luxury piece, right? Most teams are not splashing big cash on a guard. If you're going to give big cash to a guard, Joe Thuney's one of the guys you do it for.
Right.
And they splashed significant free agent cash on a guard. And they used a second-round pick on a center. And then they struck gold in the 5th round with Trey Smith in the same draft. But they spent some significant draft capital on a position where you don't often see sufficient or extensive draft capital expended upon at the center spot. So the Chiefs have shown that they are willing to invest in the offensive line. And I think that, and every team in the league is like this. Every team in the league, you go up and down. The teams that are successful on an annual basis, playoff contenders on an annual basis, they have positions they prioritize and positions they don't. Positions they think we're going to invest here, and positions where they decide, no, it's not quite worth the investment. And for the Chiefs, I'm thinking offensive line is one of those positions that they've looked at and determined this is a place where we want to put our resources. This is a place where if we're overpaying for a starter here, or if we're overpaying for, above average, we're paying above average superstar money at left tackle, it's worth it to keep this group together to make sure our ultimate investment, our crown jewel, is protected.
It's an interesting situation with Wiley because he's got a replaceable talent level, but it works, and it works. And continuity is probably more important on the offensive line in general than it is at any other position group in the NFL. I mean, quarterback, obviously, but when you're talking about multiple players on the field at the same time, I don't think it's any more valuable than it is along the offensive line. That, to me, feels like a situation where, hey, if you get a deal right off one of those deals that gets reported before free agency technically begins, like the Monday before the league year, Ian Rappaport tweets, rumors are the Titans are very interested in Andrew Wiley. Okay, well, a deal has probably already been struck at that point. If that doesn't happen and it's March 20th, it's March 25th, and it's still a fairly lukewarm market for Andrew Wiley, I think at that point the Chiefs probably strike a deal. Because if something is getting done immediately, that probably means it is an overpay beyond what the Chiefs would be willing to do.
That he'd be somebody's top priority on this market.
And I was looking right now from the end of the regular season, Pro Football Focus's offensive line rankings and just ranking 1 through 32 quality of offensive line. And I went directly to the bottom just to sort of emphasize my point of teams that are Super Bowl or at least playoff contenders that need offensive line help. And immediately, just reading from the bottom up, the Titans, they badly need offensive line help. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team next year, but that'd be a team that, hey, who would you rather have, Andrew Wiley or Nicholas Petit-Frere? Do you know who that is?
Vaguely.
Yeah, I played at Ohio State.
Yeah, I remember him from college.
If he had played at Wake Forest, no one would know who that is. Number 31, though, the Jets. I think the Jets have some hopes of making the playoffs next year. Yeah, big time. They need offensive line help badly. You know who their starting left tackle was at the end of the year, by the way?
It was not Mekhi Becton because he can't stay healthy.
It was Mike Remmers.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Time is a flat circle.
That explains so much.
Number 30, the Giants, who have a really good young left tackle in Andrew Thomas. He's become a very good player. Rest of their line, bunions, trash. The Saints, they could use help, although probably not a playoff team. Let's see. Who else is listed here? There's the Rams. The Rams need help again because all their dudes sucked this year, and they were all hurt, too. So there's a bunch of different playoff teams. You know who could use some help? Who's the actual legitimate Super Bowl contender? The Buffalo Bills need offensive line help. And if they say, you know what? We know that guy at the very least can be a starter on a championship caliber team. Bring him in. We need the help. I could see that happening. That seems realistic. So that's the one thing that keeps me from saying, yes, go all in on keeping Wiley, because you're not tagging him. You're going to end up tagging Brown. It's just what happens after you put the tag on him. The thing that keeps me from saying, yes, you have to do it on Wiley is the point you originally brought up, that role players on championship teams, more than anyone else, usually get overpaid in free agency the next year. And if someone's willing to say, hey, we'll give you, Collins got 3 for 21, which I remember thinking at the time, that really only 3 for 21? Like if someone says, hey, we'll give you 3 years, $26 million and the first 2 years are fully guaranteed, whatever the structure ends up being. I'd probably say, you know what? Maybe the Chiefs spend their first round pick on a tackle. Maybe that's where you end up going. And the nice thing about the Chiefs situation, as we talked about last week, you've got a bunch of picks to work with. You can move, you can maneuver in the draft, you can go find a rookie who maybe you think can be that good. Now, do you trust a rookie in that spot? Probably depends on the player. I was pulling up some mock drafts here of guys who are late first round caliber picks from, the Daniel Jeremiahs of the world or whoever else, just trying to pick up, guys who might be available at the end of the draft. CBS is a new mock draft out. I mean, there's any number of guys. We'll talk more prospects as the draft approaches in April. But I'm not saying you should be stingy about trying to sign Andrew Wiley. And hey, if you're not going to take vet minimum, we're not going to bring you back. I think he is certainly worth more than that. But I would not be surprised if one of those on the cusp teams said, we're just one or two pieces away, so we'll spend to go get it.
Speaking of that was the other scenario that Bill Barnwell posited in his ESPN.com column. This is the paragraph from the story. It's an interesting problem for general manager Brett Veach, who traded away top wide receiver Tyreek Hill last offseason and lived to tell the tale. If the Chiefs don't think they can re-sign Brown, they might franchise him for a second time, then attempt to trade him to a team in need of a solution on their quarterback's blind side. If the Jets don't trade the number 13 overall pick to the Packers for Aaron Rodgers, something he suggests earlier in the article, I wonder if a Brown deal involving that first rounder and picks going back to the Jets with Brown might make sense. The teams picking in the top quarter of the second round could also be candidates for a Brown trade. If you're the Chiefs, I don't think you can go into a season feeling anything less than certain about the blindside protection for Patrick Mahomes. That's why I can't see this happening. Like, I understand the idea behind it, where it's very likely if they tag him again, then they don't reach a long-term contract extension and he walks after this coming season, and you get a comp pick in return for a guy you trade a first round pick for. Now, hopefully you get 3 really good years, a couple of Pro Bowls, at least 1 Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Then, you probably consider that business well done. But the idea you'd rather trade a player a year too early before you trade him a year too late, I understand that. At the same time, that would, if the Chiefs did something like that, it would suggest to me they have a guy in the draft they love.
Yeah.
And they think they can plug in on day one if they get him that can start at left tackle. But I cannot see the Chiefs being able to accept uncertainty at the left tackle spot. And no, I don't think in this scenario, let's say, we'll trade in Orlando Brown, but then we'll re-sign Wiley and we'll make him the left tackle. I don't see that happening either.
Too many moving parts with a scenario like that.
Yeah.
And I think that smart organizations try to avoid the abundance of moving parts scenarios as much as possible. I still personally, if I was in charge of this, I would be trying to get something done long-term with Orlando Brown. He's still young. You can live with if you're paying the number 8 best left tackle in the league, top 4 money, I don't really care. That's fine. I would rather have the stability at good to somewhere above good than to risk losing that and say, well, maybe somewhere we can find great. I don't think that gamble is worth it.
Because players get paid all the time. Russell Okung is a great example of this. Russell Okung was a good left. Eric Fisher, let's localize the example. Yeah. Eric Fisher was never a guy who was going next stop Canton, right? He was never that guy as a left tackle, but the Chiefs were willing to pay him on the high end of the scale for left tackles because you value stability so much at a position like that. Russell Okung was an example of that in Seattle for a lot of years. There are guys right now who are getting paid really good money who are not what you'd call standout left tackles. Look, Garrett Bowles got from Denver one good season, and they were willing to come off of a lot of money for him. Colton Miller in Oakland got paid really handsomely just for, adequacy and availability. So I'm with you. I think there's been a little too much hand wringing. And even there was last year, he wants to be paid like a top 5 left tackle, but is he really? Is he only the 7th or 8th best left tackle in the league? Don't split hairs. Keep the guy around who did the job to protect your quarterback's blind side in a Super Bowl winning year.
No, I'm 100% with you. That At this point, you're essentially signing him in free agency. I mean, his contract is up. That's essentially what you're doing here. Make it happen. Just keep him around. You cannot go into 2023 essentially with a blank slate at both of your tackle spots. You cannot afford to do that. I'm saying, man, look, we know that next year is going to be Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, and eventually Joe Thuney's going to come up too. You want to stagger that as much as possible and not go into a situation where you got to pay Trey, you got to pay Creed, and you've got to figure out who your new left tackle is. That's just a bad situation to be in. And I do not think the Chiefs would run themselves into that sort of situation, which is why I think they'll get something done with Brown long-term, but they've been a little cagey about those contracts in the past. I just think that he's young enough that he's still in Brett Veach's wheelhouse of, yes, we think there's more juice to squeeze out of this orange, as opposed to a Tyrann Mathieu a year ago who everyone assumed would get that deal. But, you pass 31, 32 years old, this team's ready to move on. And I don't think Brown hits that threshold. Obviously, he's not that old. So I do still think there's some interest in getting him done long-term. We'll talk more NFL later on this hour when Matt Verderame from Fansided.com joins us. But coming up after this timeout, we'll recap the weekend with the good, the bad, and the ugly right here on 580 Sports Talk.
Time for the good, the bad, and the ugly from the weekend that was here on 580 Sports Talk. If you're wondering why it's yours truly, Dan Lucero, opening the segment, Brendan Dworzinski had to step out for a moment, getting set for the final 580 Preps High School Basketball Coaches Club of the regular season. That's because postseason basketball takes place throughout the state of Kansas this week. And So we will have I believe it's a boys basketball edition. I'm going to double check that before I make that official, but I do believe it is a boys basketball edition of the program tonight, and Brendan Dworzinski just finishing that up. So he is out for this segment, at least for the start of it. So let's bring you the good, the bad, and the ugly from my perspective from the sports weekend. Good. Well, I think if you are on Eastern time, it actually happened bright and early on Monday morning. But the good for me, last night, overtime thriller in Denver between the Nuggets and the Clippers. My guy, Nikola Jokic, 40 points, 17 rebounds, and 10 assists. The last assist coming on the punctuation mark of an alley-oop pass to Bruce Brown in overtime. Nuggets beat the Clippers in overtime, sweep the season series against the Clippers, and Nikola Jokic is going to win his third MVP. There's only been 3 other guys in the history of the NBA to win 3 consecutive MVP awards, and the list is going to grow by 1 when Jokic wins his third MVP this year. And there will be howls of displeasure from Philadelphia because their guy, Joel Embiid, didn't win it. And maybe some howls of displeasure from Lawrence, from people who are still fond of Embiid and remember him fondly from his 1 year at KU. And there will be other displeasure from NBA fans who think, well, they shouldn't give him 3 MVPs. He's never been to the finals. He's never won a championship. Like, that's the only thing that matters. Like, the MVP isn't an individual regular season award. And nobody is better at playing basketball, and nobody is more valuable, and nobody is more important to his team than my perpetually bleeding, beefy Balkan boy, Nikola Jokic. He was awesome last night. I know this is not a heavy NBA crowd that we're talking to. So we don't talk a ton of NBA as a general rule, but like, if you like basketball even a little bit and you don't make the time when the Nuggets are on national TV to just watch him do what he does, you're missing out, man. It is a joy. It is an absolute joy to have that guy on my favorite team. So that was my good from the weekend. My bad from the sports weekend. I really have a bad. I might jump the bad and go straight to ugly. Or just do another good. How about the good, and the ugly this week? You know what else was good? College basketball on Saturday was good. How about some of the great finishes, the great games across college basketball? Of course, KU and K-State earned big wins. Baylor with the rally to defeat Texas at home. They fell behind 18-4. They lost Keontae George to injury. They won anyway. There were buzzer beaters all over the place. Arizona State, half-court buzzer beater to beat Arizona. Just a bunch of awesome games across college basketball on Saturday. It was a really, really good college hoops day. Really, really good college hoops weekend. Even yesterday, Wisconsin and Michigan. Hunter Dickerson, the tying 3 at the end of regulation. Michigan wins that game in overtime. Gives them a chance to maybe get on the bubble. Some great college hoops, great NBA hoops. It was a really good basketball weekend all the way around. There were some great NBA games. Boston, Philly was really good. The Lakers came back from 27 down to beat the Mavericks yesterday. I believe there was a game on Friday, the second highest scoring game in the history of the NBA. You might have missed that because it happened while we were all sleeping, but the Kings beat the Clippers 176-175 in 2 overtimes. Second highest scoring game in NBA history. Bonus points for you if you know the highest scoring game. Of course I do, because it involves my favorite team. It's Nuggets 186. Actually, no, I think the Pistons won the game. Nuggets and the Pistons played a 186-184 game back in 1984. Big shout out to Kiki Vandeweghe. Love Kiki. Anyhow, my ugly for the weekend. Professional golf. It was not a designated elevated event for the PGA Tour this week. The Honda Classic was taking place and ended up being really compelling golf with Chris Kirk, who has fought some anxiety and alcohol issues, winning on the PGA Tour for the first time in 8 years in the playoff at the Honda Classic. But it wasn't an elevated event. A lot of big names sat out the event, didn't really play in it. So that gave the full golf spotlight to Live Golf and their first event of the year at Mayakoba. Charles Howell III won, and so did his team, the Crushers, to the extent anybody cares about that.
Sick name, guys.
The Saturday TV rating on the CW for round 2 of the Live Golf Invitational Series was a 0.2. 0.2. 2.
Is that good?
Let me ask you a different question. Is it good to be outrated on your own network by an episode of World's Funniest Animals?
I mean, I'd rather watch World's Funniest Animals.
I would too. World's Funniest Animals did a better rating than Live Golf on the CW. Nobody's watching. Nobody's paying for ads. Nobody's going to pay for team sponsorships. And I think there are going to be some guys jumping off a sinking ship by the end of this Live season. I really do. I think there are going to be some guys who have some serious, like there are more than just whispers about some pretty high profile guys having some buyer's remorse on that whole thing.
That is extremely funny. I'm going to be honest with you. That is like truly hilarious. I had a really good weekend. My in-laws were in town, so we went to the KU game all together on Saturday. Got to show them around a little bit. They both went to KU. They, lived in Lawrence for a long time as well. So it was good to see them. My wife was happy to see them as well. My overall good, though, for the weekend, KU athletics as a whole, what a whale of a weekend. Basketball, win. Women's basketball, win. Brandon Schneider's 500th career win, by the way. KU softball went 4-1 in 5 games. KU baseball went 3-0 and scored 26 runs in a single game against Oakland. KU track, top 4 at the Big 12 championships indoor, and Kansas tennis beat Mizzou and SMU as well. Great weekend to be a Jayhawks. I had no bad this weekend. It was great. Chilled at home all day yesterday. Great weekend of XFL football. It was the good, and the good for me this weekend.
Nice.
And we've got more.
I went good, ugly this week. So.
All right, we'll take that. That's mostly good.
Yeah.
5 out of 6. We'll absolutely take that. We've got to get to a quick break. Matt Verderame joins us next on 580 Sports Talk. Matt Verderame covers the entire NFL over at fansided.com. Head over there and check out the Stack in the Box column podcast and the Arrowhead Addict podcast as soon as you can for all the best coverage of all things NFL. You can also follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Verderame. And actually, Matt, I think we should at least begin. You got some big news that you are wrapping things up at Fansided this week.
I am. This is my last week. I'm actually on my way to Indianapolis right now for the Combine, so I will be covering the Combine fan-sided. But I have written my last Stack the Box column. I've done I'll do my last Stack the Box podcast. And then on Monday, a week from today, I'll announce where I'm going next. But yes, I am wrapping up after 8 years fan-sided.
Well, and what a tremendous 8 years they were. And we are all, and I'll speak for Dan and everyone here at 580, we are extremely excited to find out what is next for Matt Verderame covering the NFL. And let's start with the Combine this week, talking about that. You mentioned you are on your way to Indianapolis right now. Is there anything that already has kind of leaked out among you guys who cover the league or from agents or players or anything? Any big storylines that you believe are going to be talked about a lot or going to be rumored about a lot once you get there to Indy?
I think you're going to find out some stuff about this quarterback carousel and free agency. Look, I know free agency doesn't technically start until the middle of March. It starts tonight at hotel bars. I mean, that's the reality. So, you're going to start to get a sense of what's going on with Derek Carr. Now Carson Wentz is on the market. You already know Baker Mayfield's out there, Sam Darnold's out there. But the big players, of course, at the quarterback position, Lamar Jackson, who everybody and their mother expects to be tagged, and then Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers, right? So I think you're going to have a little bit of movement. Doesn't mean that by the time we're out of here, everybody's going to be signed, sealed, and delivered covertly. I don't think that's going to be the case. But I think you're going to have a greater sense of where a lot of this headed as we get into the new calendar year in a few weeks.
When it comes to the quarterbacks, is there a domino that is going to fall that's going to trigger the rest of it? Is it Derek Carr because he's fine. He's a fine starting quarterback, but he's going to probably improve a team like the Jets or, whoever else? Or is it going to be Aaron Rodgers because he's the biggest fish out there right now? Is there one of those, or is it just sort of a case-by-case situation that either one of them could go first, second, et cetera?
Well, Carr kind of holds some of the power here because he's a free agent right now. I mean, he can go out, he can sign whoever he wants. The Carson Wentz can too, but nobody's racing out to sign Carson Wentz. So Carr holds the power in that regard. But I do think that the first domino in a lot of ways is going to be Rodgers, unless you get a team that just says, we're not waiting around, we're not taking any chances, we're going to get our guy right now, and it's Derek Carr, because Rodgers is the best guy that is potentially available. And if he decides, if the Packers decide to move on mutually or however it works out, and he's on the block, yeah, I mean, let's face it, they're the Jets. Would you rather have Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr? There's a real conversation to be had. Rodgers is better, but he's older. He's going to cost a draft pick or two. He's going to cost more money. But I think either guy could go first. And Carr kind of has a little bit of that control for obvious reasons. But I would not be surprised if teams are kind of waiting to see what's going to happen in Green Bay.
Our guest is Matt Verderame. He joins us every week at this time to talk National Football League news and notes here on 580 Sports Talk. You can check out Matt on Twitter at Matt Verderame. Matt, as you head off to the NFL scouting combine this week in Indianapolis, what is the most intriguing storyline? A player, a position group, teams skipping the combine, not sending their coaching staffs, some pretty prominent teams. What is the storyline that is the most interesting to you?
I think the easy answer is the quarterbacks, because it's always the quarterbacks. But if you want to skip over that, I would say, just looking at, I'm fascinated with this receiver group. There's no receiver that you look at this year and go, that guy's Jamar Chase. That guy is top 5, no doubt, blue chipper. But there are a lot of guys that could go between picks 15 and 50, 15 and 75. Who's going to step up this week? Who's going to get themselves to that conversation? Either maybe they're thought of right now as a day 2 guy, and then they go into day 1, or they're thought of as a late day 1. Now they move up to high mid-round 1. I'm always curious with that. And with receivers, that can happen at the combine because a guy can go out and everybody thinks in the world he's going to run a 4.6, and he runs a 4.4. differently about him. Look, I think sometimes that stuff's crazy. Sometimes it's legitimate. But that's one thing. And then the other thing, I think, just from, if you're looking for one player who might define the combine, Anthony Richardson, the quarterback out of Florida. I've talked to people in the league who think he's a top 10 pick all day. I've talked to other people in the league who think he's worth a mid-round 2 pick. You're going to have a huge range of opinion going into this week on him. If he goes out, I think everybody that he will, and then he goes out and he dominates in the drills, he could solidify himself not only as a top 10 pick, but as be the first quarterback off the board after Bryce Young. So in the draft class, in my opinion, has more to gain this week in a lot of ways than Richardson does.
Matt, to a point you just brought up, is it the consensus among folks around the league right now that it is Bryce Young at 1 no matter what? Matt, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, sorry, you cut out. What?
Yeah, sorry. Minor technical difficulties here. I was just checking. Is it pretty much the consensus around league circles right now that it's Bryce Young at number 1 no matter what?
Yes. Sorry. I think most everybody would agree that Young's the guy. Now, there are some concerns. Look, he's small. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking if he measured in at 5'10", 5'11", and under 200 pounds. No, I think it would actually be shocking if he measures it over 6 feet. I think the general idea is, look, he's going to be 5'10", 5'11", a $185, maybe a $190. That's diminutive for a quarterback. I mean, you're talking about, not quite Kyler Murray, but the smallest quarterback in the first round since. So I think that is a real concern for some teams. Some teams are going to look at that size and be worried. Now, it doesn't really matter if the Houston Texans or the Indianapolis Colts, whoever ends up drafting number 1, decides, hey, we're good with it. As long as they're good with it, none of it matters otherwise. But yes, I think he's the clear number 1, and then I think it's Stroud and Richardson in some order, depending on the front office, and then Levis out of Kentucky.
What's your opinion of Anthony Richardson? I'm curious what your impression of him is. I don't know how much you've gotten to see of him play, whether in games or just watching some tape, but what is your impression of him? Because tools-wise, there's no question. Like, tools-wise, he almost favors Josh Allen a little bit, but the production wasn't there. He didn't win a lot of games at Florida. What's your take? Do you think he's a guy that a team is going to say, we want him to come in and we're going to make him the franchise? Or do you think he might be better served ending up in a situation where he can go somewhere and develop behind a veteran for a year?
I think it's ideally developed behind a veteran. If you look in college, I think he's only thrown, and I'm going to be off a little bit on this, I don't have it right in front of me, but something like 400 passes in college the entire time at the collegiate level. So he's raw, man. I mean, he didn't even complete 60% of his throws this past season. Like, you're asking that guy to come in and immediately start. Like, I'll give you I think the perfect spot for him is Carolina. Frank Reich, former head coach, former NFL quarterback, who could come in there, give him a year to sit, bring in a guy for 1 year to be a veteran stopgap. I think that would be a perfect situation. Like, let him develop. I think the worst thing that could happen to Anthony Richardson is he goes to a team that day one he's just thrown into the fire, and he's got to be the quarterback. I had one front office executive compare him tools-wise to Cordell Stewart, which I actually thought was really interesting because for those of you who remember Cordell Stewart, he was before his time. I mean, he was a guy in the mid-'90s who everybody, looked at and said, well, what is he? Is he a receiver? Is he a quarterback? Now it would be no question he'd be a quarterback. And he had all the physical gifts in the world. But I think in that era, nobody quite knew what to do with him. Now, of course, that's not a problem. Richardson has tools for days. Everybody believes in the character of the kid that I've spoken to. It's just going to be a question of, does he fall in the right situation, and can he develop in the way a lot of people believe he can?
Our guest is Matt Verderame here on 580 Sports Talk, talking all things National Football League. Matt, a topic we were discussing at the top of the program, the Kansas City Chiefs have 2 starting offensive tackles hitting the free agent market. We've talked a ton over the last year and change about Orlando Brown Jr., and the Chiefs have another big decision coming up. Do they tag him for a second time? Do they work on a long-term extension? There's lots to be discussed with Orlando Brown, but Andrew Wiley may have played himself into a payday down the stretch, and particularly in the Super Bowl. What kind of market do you think there's going to be for Andrew Wiley? And is it the kind of market that might be prohibitive for the Chiefs to be able to bring him back?
It could be. I mean, look, I think with Brown, he's either getting a surprising long-term extension right in the next, month or next week and a half, or he's getting tagged. He's not hitting free agency. I would be floored, absolutely floored if he got free agency. So with Wiley, he made himself money in that Super Bowl. But that game obviously has a ton of power. Everybody in the world's watching. Do I think he's going to make all of a sudden $20 million a year? No. But I think Wiley, realistically, you can see $10 million a year. He can see $8 to $10 million a year. Now, a lot of it with the NFL, with any player, comes down to structure and guaranteed money. How much guaranteed money's in there? What is the structure of that guaranteed money? But if the Chiefs could get him back at 3-18, I think they do it. 2-12 or even 2-16. Would they go 3-30? I don't know that they'd do that. I mean, they have a lot of things to consider, but I do think that Wiley's probably getting a multi-year deal. And the other thing that helps him is really look at the free agency market. There's not a lot of guys out there. I mean, McGlinchey's the best right tackle. After that, what is there? I mean, there's just not a lot. So if you need a tackle, Wiley's going to be pretty high up on your board. I think that he's going to get a decent deal. I think he'll be paid like a mid-level right tackle, which I think is what he is. Which is what he should be paid as.
Matt, final question I've got for you, and that is about the Orlando Browns situation. Do you have a lean on what contract he will be playing on next year? Because I think he's going to get tagged, and I don't think you can possibly, if you're the Chiefs, and I doubt they will, they're a well-run organization, go into a year totally blind at what they're doing at tackle. Do you have a lean one way or the other if it'll be just 1 year on a second tag or a long-term deal for him right now?
I don't yet. I mean, look, my feeling on Brown is they're going to tag him again. I mean, I just don't see a way around that unless, again, they come to the table here at the 11th hour for the tag deadline and somehow they hammer out a contract. But that's usually not the way these things work. He's going to get tagged. This will run all the way into the summer because that's the way every single one of these things plays out. And then come, mid-June, you start paying attention, and the deadline's for action, and July 15th will be that deadline for a long-term contract. The question's going to be, look, how much guaranteed money are they willing to give him? They were not willing to guarantee him a lot of money last year. And then he came in this year. He did not play particularly well the first half of the year. He's a little banged up. Second half of the year played really well and was great in the playoffs. Do you pay him? I mean, I think, look, realistically, it's going to cost them $22 million a year, $23 million a year. And I know people balk at that, but if you don't pay that, then you better be prepared to draft the left tackle and put him on that side and hope that he can play. Because if you draft him and he can't play, now you got a guy protecting Mahomes' blind side who can't play. So that's the leverage for Brown, and he knows it. I think the Chiefs are going to negotiate. I think the Chiefs would like to keep him long-term. But are they going to go far enough that it satisfies Brown's demands? We'll have to wait and see. But I think he gets tagged for starters, for sure.
Matt Verderame covers the entire NFL. You can find him on Twitter at Matt Verderame. You can find his work this week covering the NFL Combine, as well as his entire archive of Stack in the Box columns over at fansided.com. Matt, we appreciate the time as always. Thank you so much. Enjoy Indianapolis. Congrats on the great run at Fansided, and we're excited for next week where we find out what's next. Appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
That is Matt Verderame from, for now, fansided.com. Appreciate the time. Busy week this week, obviously, with the Combine going on. Fun fact, I own a Cordell Stewart jersey. I found it for, I think, $8 at a Goodwill.
Steelers or Bears?
Yeah, Steelers.
Okay.
I wouldn't wear Bears one. Steelers one, though, I definitely would wear.
And Cordell, that's one of the first football players I have vivid recollection of. Early 90s in Colorado.
Well, yeah, when you were a kid, that would have been, he was the guy.
Him and Rashawn Salam. That was my first football jersey, was a Rashawn Salam, Colorado number 19.
His Hail Mary, Cordell Stewart's, is one of my favorite college football highlights of all time.
Oh, just unbelievable. As good as it gets.
Keith Jackson on the call. Oh, the word touchdown was made for Keith Jackson to say it.
It really was.
Truly beautiful. We've got to get to a timeout for the national and local news, but coming up to lead off the 4 o'clock hour, we'll talk some K-State basketball as they're now gunning for a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. We'll talk some KU, and we've got our What is Wrong with You semifinals for February. All that and more is coming up next hour right here on 580 Sports Talk. o'clock hour of 580 Sports Talk coming your way. Brendan Dworzinski and Dan Lucero here with you. Thanks so much for stopping by on this final Monday of the month of February, 27th of 2023. We're here with you until 6 o'clock. Coming up right at the top of the 6 o'clock hour today, we've got the penultimate edition of the 580 Preps High School Basketball Coaches Club, a boys basketball edition of the show, as we get ready for sub-state action coming up this week. In fact, sub-state action begins tonight in the lower classes. Care Paravel, our city team that is playing tonight. Got to speak to Trey Brown, their head coach, a little bit earlier on, so we'll still hear from him coming up on the show before they get that game underway this evening. High school basketball broadcasts, by the way, for the sub-state round of the postseason begin tomorrow night right here on 580 WIBW. We'll have doubleheader action, in fact. 6A boys will lead things off. We've got Washburn Rural in action coming up at 6 o'clock tomorrow from the House of Blues, and myself and Larry Latimer will be on the call of that one. As soon as that game is over, we will send it over to Dan, who will be at the pressure cooker at Highland Park for the Highland Park Lady Scots taking on Leavenworth. All that action begins tomorrow night, 6, and then sometime just after 7 o'clock right here on 580 WIBW and FM 104.9. We'll also have action coming up, by the way, Thursday and Friday this week. No Wednesday. We've got a K-State men's basketball game coming up on Wednesday night, and then the K-State men play on Saturday as well. As for this hour of 580 Sports Talk, we've got some K-State hoops to talk about. They picked up another win. They're building some momentum as we get closer and closer to the Big 12 tournament and NCAA tournament. So we'll talk about that win. We'll talk about seedings for them as well. We'll chat a little KU later on in the hour as they narrowly held off West Virginia this weekend. That game was stressful. So we'll talk about that later on in the hour. Plus, we've got our monthly semifinals for What Is Wrong With You. Our 4 semifinalists going head-to-head. We'll have a couple of semifinal matchups, and then we will get our finalists for tomorrow's show. All that is coming up this hour. You can be a part of the show as well on the Big O Tires text line. 785-272-9429 is the text line number. And, of course, the comment section is open on YouTube as well. Our channel is, as always, called 58 Sports on 580 WIBW. Maybe if I actually got the name of the channel right, that would help people steer to the right direction. Sports on 580 WIBW. That is the name of our YouTube channel. K-State beat Oklahoma State this weekend. They were down 8 early in the second half, if I'm not mistaken. I barely got to see any of this game. As I mentioned, I was doing stuff with my in-laws, and we went to Allen Fieldhouse early so they could see the museum and watch warm-ups and all that. So didn't get to see much at all of the K-State game, but I was following along. Coming back from an 8-point deficit in the second half on the road against a scrappy, as we talked about last week, desperate Oklahoma State team that really needed a win, has now lost 4 games in a row. That's a good win for K-State. That is a very solid, good win for K-State. And it came at the right time, too. And we'll get to the game itself here momentarily. But you look at everything else that's going on in the greater college basketball landscape when we're talking about bracketology and seeding and getting ready for the NCAA tournament. K-State has won back-to-back games. Who are the other teams who are contending for a 2 seed right now? Well, Gonzaga's in the hunt. They picked up a good win over St. Mary's this weekend.
Yeah.
Arizona is in line for a number 2 right now. What happened to them on Saturday, Dan?
They got sniped at the buzzer by Arizona State on a half-court shot.
They absolutely did, and it was very, very funny. I don't like Arizona State. I don't really like Arizona either. Very funny way for that to come to a close. UCLA barely beat a very mediocre Colorado team. They did, and that's what counts. That's not a good Colorado team. This is, what was his name? McKinley Wright ain't walking through that door.
No.
Like that's maybe next year they'll be okay. I think they're pretty young, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, super young, and they got one of the best high school talents in the country who's projected to be like a top 2 pick in the NBA draft going to Colorado, which is wild.
Pretty good. But they're not very good this year.
No.
There is a great opportunity at hand for K-State right now. Tennessee, that's another team contending for a 2 seed right now. The metrics love Tennessee, have all year. They also can knock it out of their own way and have stepped on the proverbial rake numerous times in the back part of the SEC season. There is undeniably a chance for K-State to solidify a number 2 seed. Texas, there's another one for you. They play KU on Saturday afternoon. That game is going to mean a lot in all likelihood, not just for the Big 12 championship, but possibly for Texas's spot seeding-wise as well. There's no shame in losing to KU, but if you're talking about, well, we've got to find something to differentiate these teams somewhere, can't really afford to lose games late in the season. So,
and they better watch out that they don't get got in Fort Worth tomorrow.
Good point.
Like that's a massive game that Texas can't find themselves overlooking, because TCU, they got a good road win. They pulled one out against Texas Tech on Saturday, but TCU's trying to climb up the seed line a little bit and show that they're a lot closer to the team they were before the Mike Miles injury. That is not going to be an easy game for Texas whatsoever, because Texas went on the road, had an 18-4 lead against a team that lost arguably their best player to an injury 6 minutes in, and they ended up getting blown out by Baylor on Saturday. So what is that? What is the knock-on effect for that for Texas going into Tuesday? Because that's a must-win for them if they want Saturday to mean anything.
Yeah. Allen Fieldhouse, by the way, hyped when the collective inside saw the score of that Baylor-Texas game. Very, very excited. Look at Scott Drew. Never said a bad word about Scott Drew. Never said a bad word about the Baylor Bears. Doing their old pals, Bill Self and the Kansas Jayhawks, is solid. But K-State is in a great spot, and to get to that 2 line, you've got to be able to take care of your own business, not just rely on help. And getting solid wins on the road like they got against Oklahoma State is a great step in that direction.
Yeah, and the way they won the game, too, was really impressive to me because, as you mentioned, they went behind by 8. And it started to feel like the Oklahoma game a little bit, where it just seemed like nothing was really going for Kansas State. They weren't in an offensive rhythm. They weren't making shots. Building starting to make a little buzz. And they get behind by 8. They put together a little run, and then Jerome Tang gets teed up. And my reaction when I see Jerome Tang get called for a technical foul is, well, we know it's not something he said. Because if we know anything about Jerome Tang, he's not one who dabbles in profanity, let's say. Like he has said multiple times, he's not somebody who's going to swear, who's going to unload on the officials. Apparently he got called for the technical foul because he thought there was a foul on a breakaway layup, and he clapped his hands together to kind of try and say there was contact.
Yeah.
And officials don't like it when you clap your hands at them.
No.
Like, even if it's not like in their face, they don't like it when you clap your hands in their general direction. That gets you a technical foul from some of the more sensitive refs out there. So Jerome Tang gets teed up, and I'm watching the game thinking, man, that's a bad time for it. They just cut that 8-point lead in half. They're starting to get a little momentum, 10 minutes to go. That's not real good timing for a technical foul, and I don't think Tang went overboard. It's not one of those he's trying to get, but, man, it just felt like really unfortunate timing for it. Oklahoma State hits both of their free throws, go back up by 6, and then Kansas State hit the gas from there. They just found their rhythm. They started making some threes. Cam Carter hit a big one to tie it at 55. Keontae Johnson put them ahead for good with about 6 minutes left with a 3. Ish Massoud hit a big 3 to give him some breathing room after the Johnson 3, gave him a 65-60 lead. And then from there, it was the composure of Kansas State. So often this year, we've seen teams not play with great composure down the stretch on the road in Big 12 play, because there are lots of really good teams and lots of really tough places to play. And we've seen teams kind of melt down, kind of lose their composure. You add that into the troubles that Kansas State has had and did have for a chunk of Saturday's game with ball security. They turned the ball over another 16 times on Saturday. And you wondered, okay, are they going to be able to see it through? Are they going to be tough enough to make the right play, to get good offense, to run their stuff, make their free throws, all those things? They saw it through, I thought, in a way that showed a tremendous amount of mental toughness. One thing that has stood out over the years and years, and we're talking about 2 decades now of Kansas dominating Big 12 basketball. And one of the reasons they've been able to do it is because when they do stub their toe in league play, and it has happened not every year. I mean, there have been some years where KU was just head and shoulders above the rest of the conference.
Yeah.
Like, 2020 went 17-1, and there were another year in there where they went
2017. They were really, really good.
Yeah. But in some of those years where, KU might lose 2 in a row, which is extremely rare, or they lose 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
And you get to wondering, it's because it's the middle of the conference season. You get to wondering, hey, what's wrong with KU? Are they being exposed? Have they hit a wall? Is this the year that Team X or Team Y rises up and beats KU, and KU's not a factor in the league title race? And then KU just finds their footing. They conquer the dog days, right? Because every team has dog days over the course of the Big 12 schedule. It's just too rugged a league. Every team is going to meet adversity. Every team is going to have challenges. Every team is going to encounter fatigue, and every team is going to encounter adversity. And KU has had a knack over the years for riding it out and conquering it and punching their way back up the standings. And I think that when Kansas State hired Jerome Tang as their head coach, I think we've seen the value in this first year. I think Jerome Tang's proved his value in a lot of ways. I think he's going to win National Coach of the Year. But one of the ways I think it's been valuable to have Jerome Tang on the bench is because he has that understanding of what it takes to survive 18 games in the Big 12.
Yeah.
What it takes to feel like the sky isn't falling because you've lost back-to-back games.
And that's especially valuable for this roster, right? Because you've only got two guys who have done it before. I mean, I opined about that a couple weeks ago, that I thought that was wearing on this team when they were going through their mid-ish season slide, that eventually the physicality, the grind of the Big 12 schedule was getting to them. I imagine it's got to be valuable to have a guy in Jerome, and, you know, Noel being one of the most important players on this team can say, hey, I've been through this too. But to have a guy on the sideline and in practice every day who can say, look, guys, we can get through this. I've been through this before. I know what we need to do. I know what we need to do to get through this and get to brighter days and get to greener pastures and get to the point where we feel like we've got momentum going into the postseason. I imagine that's, you know, really invaluable to a point. And Baylor's been through that before. And you can say what you will, and trust me, I do, about Scott Drew and the whininess and all that. But there's no denying, you go back, God, 5, 6, 7 years of Baylor basketball at this point. Those teams have been tough as hell. They have been tough. They have been gritty. You don't want to play them. They have withstood runs and slumps and whatever, and have been one of the best programs in college basketball. And I imagine part of that culture, it's not even imagining it at this point, I think it's pretty obvious, part of that culture came and is now part of the culture K-State is building.
Because what Baylor had to do is they wanted to be the program that Scott Drew, that any coach would desire their program to be. You want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And when you're in the same league as Kansas, you can't help but look at Kansas and say, hey, this is what we got to be. This is what we got to do. This is the kind of mental toughness we have to have. This is the kind of defensive toughness we got to have. And this is the way we have to navigate this 18-game minefield of a league schedule. We can't let 2 losses in a row or 3 and 4 or 6 and 8 or whatever it ended up being for K-State there in that stretch. Can't let it bring you down. You can't let it be fatal. You have to be able to focus on the next game, regroup, get your legs back under you. The way Jerome Tang put it himself, and I want to find this because I thought the quote was really funny. He was talking post-game, and the way that he talked about it, I want to find the quote here. I've got it here. He says, we told them there was going to be adversity, and you had to look at adversity in the face and smile and then slap the crap out of it. That's the quote from the post-game press conference from Jerome Tang. And I mean, for one, again, told you the guy doesn't swear. But second of all, it just goes to show you that there's that understanding of what it takes that Tang has been able to convey to this team, so that stretch where they go on the road to Texas Tech and Oklahoma and they lose both of those games and it feels like the sky is falling. I mean, look, I saw all the doom and gloom on my Twitter timeline, K-State people, you know, in my mentions, quote tweeting me, all kinds of doom and gloom after that 2-game stretch. And since then, Kansas State has won. They won back-to-back home games against ranked teams. Then they went on the road, beat a desperate team. And it was how they beat them, too. They beat them by being better on defense. They beat them by out-rebounding a much bigger and much more physical Oklahoma State team. K-State won the rebounding battle in that game. They were +3 on the glass overall. And they beat them by executing down the stretch, keeping their composure on the road. Every time I think there's just no way I could be more impressed with the coaching job that Tang has done, or no way I could be more impressed with how this K-State team has developed as the season has progressed, they keep impressing me in a different way.
Are they a 2 seed? Like right now, if the season ended today, would you, bracketologist Danatology, put them as a 2?
Only Kansas has more quad 1 wins than Kansas State.
And I understand that that's kind of a feedback loop thing, that eventually when you only play, like, they've been subjected to more of those, so you play more of them, and the positivity kind of it becomes circular. But no one in the country is arguing against this being the best league in the country. Every single win is a good win. So, and I've seen that criticism that maybe, this league's good, but maybe it's like become a self-fulfilling prophecy, almost like the SEC in football. But I mean, take Texas Tech. Where do they finish in the Big Ten this year? Fifth
or sixth,
right? Like no worse than that. It really is the best league. So, and I'm sorry to cut off your point, but no. I've seen that as a complaint against giving the Big 12 a 1 and a 2 or 2 2s and a 3 or a 2 and 2 3s, whatever it ends up being. That, well, yeah, but it's all kind of self-referential to a point, but all those teams are the best. It is by far the best league in the country.
So real quick, Baylor and Texas now have more quad 1 wins than Kansas State. This was not the case when I looked at it on Saturday afternoon.
Okay.
I assume that Baylor's extra quad 1 win is Texas, and maybe Texas picked up another one because somebody they played moved into or became eligible for the criteria that gives them a quad 1 win. But KU 15-5 against quad 1. Baylor's 10-8. Texas is 10-7. K-State is 9-6 against quad 1 opponents. Like Alabama's got 9 quad 1 wins, but they've only played 13 of those games. Purdue has only played 13 of those games. So Kansas State playing a much more difficult schedule. They've got the 9 quad 1 wins. I would think that they would deserve a 2 over Baylor because they swept them in the regular season. I'd give them a 2 over UCLA because I don't think the Pac-12 is very good. And I'd apply that same logic to Arizona that I'm not sure that, like, I would rank Kansas State above those teams personally. It's interesting. I think that, you look at Tennessee, and I know they're 21-8, and they're third in the net rankings overall, but they've only got 6 quad 1 wins.
And that should mean something. Like if you're going to put together this system that naturally splits all your teams into quad 1, quad 2, quad 3 wins, quad 4, that should have a lot of weight to it. I am as much as I like the predictive metrics, I like Bart Torvik and I like Ken Pom and I like all these other places that do those kinds of things. I will always believe resume should come first when you're picking teams for and then seeding the NCAA tournament. Like you can tell me, I'm trying to look for a good example of this here, a team that has probably overperformed their actual quality. But like you can tell me all about how, well, this team should be this good, or in these simulations they're this good. That there's real legitimate value to that. And in tiebreaker situations, sure, fine. But K-State having that record, I mean, seriously, how many comparable resumes to K-State are undeniably better than K-State's right now? I don't think there are many.
I don't either.
Like, let's take a team right now who's also going for a 2 seed. Go Arizona, okay? Arizona's got 9 quad 1 games. They're 7-2 in those. They've got an 8-0, they play more quad 4 games than anyone in the Big 12 has. They play a weaker schedule overall, but just by nature, losing to Arizona State. Well, Arizona State's okay, but by nature, some of their losses, Washington State. They lost to Washington State this year. They're miles worse than any other Big 12 team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, K-State, by nature of who they've played and who they've beaten, should be ahead of that team. And I know everyone views it differently, but that's how I would put it.
My other logic is if it's good enough for Joe Lenardi and Jerry Palm, it's good enough for me. And both of those gentlemen in their most recent bracketology, in fact, Palm put his out this morning, new bracketology that has K-State at 2. And in that scenario, K-State is going to Des Moines. Kansas is going to get a 1. They're going to Des Moines. That's going to be quite a caravan heading north on I-35 here in a couple of weeks if this seeding holds. And I have no reason to expect that it won't.
Yeah.
Kansas State should beat Oklahoma at home on Wednesday night. They should handle Oklahoma. Unless Oklahoma beat Iowa State at Hilton on Saturday. That says
Throw
more.
That team in the trash.
That says more to me about Iowa State. They are cooked.
Yeah, they're done.
They are cooked. They are a well done steak of a basketball team right now.
Not to totally take away from the point, like that's got to be an effect of not having enough dudes and playing like 125% every game, right? Is that at some point you just have burned yourself to a crisp? Because this happened last year.
Yeah, like they started 12-0, and then after that, I think they went 8-12 the rest of the way. But then they went to the Sweet 16. Like, so, maybe it works better in the tournament. Maybe that was about their draw. I don't remember who it was they played in the tournament last year, but
I know they upset Wisconsin to get to the Sweet 16. But Wisconsin was, I think, the most picked team to get upset in the entire tournament when they played Colgate.
Yes, I know I picked that upset.
Yeah, same here.
But I think that says more about Iowa State. I think Kansas State's going to be a lot more ready for Oklahoma. And I don't think Oklahoma's going to go like 6 of 8 from deep or whatever it was that they went from behind the arc in the second half. And they always score 50-odd points. Like, it's not like they went crazy. They beat a team that looks crocked, just completely out of gas. So they should win that game. And then I guess it wouldn't be great if they lost at West Virginia, but I also don't think that would be fatal to their hopes of getting a 2 seed. I really don't, because the metrics have loved West Virginia all season, right? All year.
What's West Virginia in the net? They are 26th in the net. Like, they're 60-13 overall, and yet they're 26th in the net. Compare that to a team. Let me go find
They're
best
20th in the Ken Palm, for the record, 1 spot behind Kansas State.
And you compare that to a team like, and I got to look this up here, Pitt. Pitt is 21-8. Pitt leads the ACC and is 53rd in the net. They actually went down from yesterday, from 52 to 53. Like, that tells you how good this Big 12 conference is and why they should get promoted more, because they have the best resumes as a whole.
So I do. I think Kansas State, I don't think that, if they won the conference tournament, they'd surely get the number 2 seed, if they win it all in Kansas City. But no, I think that they're trending towards being a number 2 seed. I think the committee will look at the Big 12 and rightly judge it the best league in America and give 4 of their teams top 3 seeds.
Will that possibly include bumping KU up over a Houston or an Alabama to get one of those top 2 number 1 overall seeds? We'll discuss that, plus KU's win over West Virginia, a little bit later on this hour. Right now, though, after this commercial break, we've got to get to our semifinals of What Is Wrong With You for the month of February on 580 Sports Talk. We are on to the semifinals of What Is Wrong With You for the month of February here on 580 Sports Talk with Brendan and Dan. 4 stories, our 4 weekly winners going head-to-head today to find our 2 finalists for tomorrow as we find our monthly champion in What Is Wrong With You. Semifinal number 1. I put these together in random order. Semifinal number 1, they are actually our 2 most recent weekly winners. The Definitely Not Dead diagnosis versus the TNT teacher. Dan, would you like to describe the first story? I believe that was yours originally.
It was. It was a Florida story, Clearwater, Florida. 2 West Central Florida paramedics suspended after pronouncing a man dead who was not dead. The paramedics from Clearwater Fire and Rescue were placed on administrative duty. They responded to a call about a 65-year-old man in cardiac arrest at a private residence. And shortly after arrival, these 2 responders pronounced the man dead and then left as deputies from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office arrived to investigate. Yeah, bag them and tag them. You guys got it from here. We're going to go to Wendy's or do whatever it is that paramedics do when they're done with their work.
Gotta go get a Frosty right now.
Anyhow, according to a news release, a deputy noticed one very crucial bit of information that apparently the paramedics overlooked. The man was breathing, and he requested that, and the deputy requested that medical crews return to the scene. About 28 minutes between the initial call and Largo fire rescue crews, but they were able to get the man to a hospital, and he is still recovering.
Well, I'm glad he is still alive because the thing is, that could have essentially been a self-fulfilling prophecy. No, he's dead. Well, he might have been dead because he didn't get the proper care.
Yeah, went into cardiac arrest, and they took one look and decided, maybe nudged them with their toes and said, "Yep, dead. Don't ask." We've seen a few dead bodies. We know when we see them. This one is dead. Dead as Elvis. All right, pack it up. It's time for a break. No, it was not time for a break. The man was still breathing. Like, you have to imagine.
How do you not know?
You have to imagine they didn't even feel for a pulse.
Right.
Like do CPR, chest compressions, nothing.
Isn't his chest still moving? Nah. Optical illusion. He's dead.
They just had to walk up to him, look at him, and his chest doesn't look like it's rising or falling that much. Dead.
Do you think this was more malice or incompetence?
Incompetence.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I can't imagine deciding that a guy is dead. That'd be more paperwork for everybody. He'd do everything to make sure that guy's alive.
Right. No one wants to fill out paperwork. Speaking of, let's go to the TNT teacher from Hazel Park, Michigan. But we meet Paul Jacobs, a 40-year-old from Livonia, Michigan, who is a teacher. And he really wanted a day off. He had no interest in going to Hazel Park Junior High, wanted a day off. So what did he do? He wrote a bomb threat and left it on his desk. And it said that the school would be blown up the next day. Police initially thought Jacobs saw the note but failed to report it. The building was searched by officers and canine units that Thursday night. No explosives were discovered. Now they believe Jacobs placed the note himself with the intention of classes being canceled. There are much easier ways to get out of going to work. I promise you.
Now that was stupidity.
Extremely, extremely stupid. This is a nice battle. This is a really good month of stories. Who wins this one?
Oh, so tough. I love both of these stories, but I guess the TNT teacher one, is someone who is married to a teacher. It's a little closer to home for me. Not that my wife, and she has explicitly said this to me, would ever do something this stupid. But the idea of wanting an off day really, really badly, I think that's probably relatable to every teacher who just thinks, man, it'd be great to have tomorrow off. It'd be great if I could play hooky, like sometimes my kids get to. What would be a way I could play hooky? Could I use some professional time off, personal time off, a little PTO action? No, I'll just make a fake bomb threat. And then everybody gets the day off. And then I'll be the hero. And everybody will remember my name, and I'll be everyone's hero.
Dog, leave a Schoolhouse Rock VHS on your desk. There's your lesson plan for your sub. You're done. You're settled. That's all you need to do.
Yeah, the sheer laziness. I don't feel like doing sub plans, so we just got school canceled. It's like Crash Davis in Bull Durham. I'll get you a rain out, boys. You guys want an in-service day? I'll get you a day off of school.
Unbelievable. Is that your vote?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's mine too. Just You ruined everyone's day. You got to bring the cops in. You got to bring the canine in. You just ruined everyone's day. The kids, the other teachers. Come on. Our other semifinal, so let's mark that one is advancing on to tomorrow, the TNT teacher, are two earlier winners from the month. The first is the Chicken Wing Embezzler from near my neck of the woods. This is in the suburbs of Chicago. I'm from the western, the eastern, the southern, but it's all pretty close to one another.
It's all Chicago.
It really is. Someone meets me, they're like, oh yeah, where in Chicago are you from? No one knows where LaGrange Park is. No one has a clue. Chicago. Anyway, we meet Vera Little, who, according to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, allegedly launched an embezzlement scheme that resulted in the theft of chicken wings costing more than $1.5 million in tax money. The alleged scheme began during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Schools were closed on state order, replaced by virtual learning. However, they continued to order food from their meal provider because they were still getting meals for underprivileged students who maybe needed their lunch every day via the school. Glad they were doing that. Well, this woman, Miss Little, or Liddell, decided, you know what? Maybe I'm going to make this work for me, too. So she did, and she continued to order 11,000 cases of chicken wings from Gordon Food Service. The food service company, by the way, said, all right, I'm sure. Whatever, they're signed off on. Why not? The school had a policy, do not order chicken wings because of the bones. We don't want someone choking. We don't want that. No chicken wings. This woman said, no one's going to check it. And they didn't for a year and a half until someone who worked in accounting said, wait a minute, we're already over budget and we're only 3 months into the year. What happened here? And then they found out the $1.5 million of chicken wings had been ordered and stolen. Wings. What are you doing with that many wings? Like, I love wings, but I'm not eating a $1.5 million worth of them.
Setting up the tailgate party to watch the Bears every Sunday. You know, Miss Liddell's spot.
Posting up now on the Blue Line station in Arlington Heights where the new stadium is.
She got
selling a plate of wings.
She got 8 different air fryers going, all kind of rubs, all kinds of sauces, ranch and blue cheese.
See, and the funny thing is that she never mixed it up. Like, you know what? Let's throw in a couple fruit cups here and there. Let's throw in, something else, some meatloaf. I don't know, something else. No, it was the same thing over and over. Clearly, you could tell something was amiss.
Just love chicken wings. Passionate about chicken wings.
I get it. I, too, am passionate about wings, but not enough to steal that many of them. Our other story, Dan, I believe this one was yours,
yes.
Deemed grand theft garbage.
I forgot how good this one was.
It really is a good one.
A couple in Dade City, Florida, who were getting their house power washed. And so
your favorite activity.
Yeah, do love a good pressure washing. Very soothing to watch, very ASMR. Anyhow, so their front yard, the front of their house is being pressure washed. So they moved their front porch furniture and window screens into the front yard. When the front of the house was done, they went into the backyard. And while workers were behind the home, a garbage truck pulled up and just decided that everything that was on the front yard had to be trash. So they gathered all the furniture and loaded it into the back of their garbage truck. That's 4 pieces of outdoor wicker furniture, including a glass top table, 2 antique rocking chairs, and 3 window screens. The couple in question immediately reached out to Waste Connections of East Pasco and spoke with customer service, and then were asked if they had a bulk item pickup request. They said, no, this isn't trash. If it were trash, it would be sitting next to my trash can. And then the trash company just never called him back, like ghosted him.
That happened to me one time when I got a hair in my burger from Jack in the Box. I tweeted about it and they DM'd me and said, oh, we'd love to send you something for your, for whatever. Can you tell us what location you got this from? Never heard back. You owe me a burger, Jack in the Box. From a time I got a hair in mine in 2016.
You got to think that this was the ugliest patio furniture that's ever existed for a trash company to come up on it and immediately assume without hanging around to check, oh yeah, this has to be trash.
But the thing is, like, how ugly can it be? Like, how big is the spectrum of the appearance of lawn furniture or of patio furniture? Like, it can only be so good or so bad.
There's some very classy patio furniture out there.
Yeah.
And then there's stuff that very clearly costs like $12 on Etsy.
I suppose.
like, old wicker. Maybe they got like some parts of it poking out,
browned a little bit. All right, fair enough.
Yeah, maybe it needed to be pressure washed.
Maybe it did. Maybe that was next, and they never got a chance to.
Never got a chance. The TV news, their investigative reporter had to get in touch with the sanitation company to make it right for this poor couple.
I love that.
The window screens, that stinks too, because those, those probably aren't cheap.
No.
Depending on how recently you've done your windows.
All right. Who wins semifinal number 2?
I hate having to pick a winner here, man. All of these are good enough to win a month, and all of these would be contenders come December. I firmly believe that. If there were a futures bet that you could get on like February, What Is Wrong With You champion winning What Is Wrong With You Tournament of Champions.
It's like plus 150.
Yeah. It's pretty good odds. Man.
I'll go first this time because I had you go first last time.
Fair.
I'm going to go with the chicken wing embezzler. Usually I'm going to lean with a winner when you can get the punchline of the story in one, like in the description on the website. Someone who worked at a school stole $1.5 million in chicken wings. Like that sentence alone is just so funny that I'm going to lean that way.
Embezzling chicken wings is a hilarious thing to do.
Chicken wing embezzler.
Also, hashtag goals.
Yeah, right.
I'd eat, like I said, I eat $1.5 million in chicken wings. You give me a year? Yeah, I can make that happen. 11,000 boxes of chicken wings.
How many are in a box? That's what I want to know.
That's a good question. Were they the wings or were they the wings, the WYNGZ that don't have real chicken meat in them?
Yeah, right. Ooh, or were they the like the ones you get at the Peanut in Kansas City where it's the whole wing, like drum and flat together? I'm going to doubt that Gordon Food Service has those, but it's possible.
Man, she's just throwing the best parties on the weekend.
For real.
Wings for everyone.
Who you got?
I'm going to have to agree with you. Yeah. Chicken wing embezzling is really, really funny.
Just so funny. That is our winner in semifinal number 2. So tomorrow, Clash of the Titans. It's the TNT teacher and the chicken wing embezzler for our February championship. Right now, we've got to get to a commercial. We'll talk some KU basketball next on 580 Sports Talk. the West Virginia Mountaineers on Saturday, 76-74. My wife asked me after the game if I ever felt like KU was going to lose. And I think I gave way too complex of an answer. But I thought, no, it never really felt like they were going to lose, like they wouldn't pull it out. But at the same time, it felt like they played losing basketball down the stretch. Like, you never want to go from up 7 to up 1 in the span of less than 2 minutes at the end of a game. Not usually a great feeling against a team that, again, to use our old theme, was desperate to get a win. And, man, that reeked of desperation in their post-game press conference, too. Bob Huggins was just talking about our schedule so much tougher we deserve to be in, even if we don't have all the wins. And Eric Stevenson said the same thing.
Copying, please. That's what they were doing.
Right. You know, you don't apologize for wins in the Big 12. It was not pretty. Bill Self, GATA, got after their asses in the post-game press conference as much as he has at any point during this back part of the year in which KU has played really well. The only two things I really took away from that game are, one, I don't ever want to see Eric Stevenson play basketball again. Not ever again. I don't want to see this West Virginia team ever again, and that's why I hope they don't make the tournament. Their entire plan was just pull-up jumper. If you have half an inch of space, just take a jump shot. Don't run a real offense. Just take jumpers. And it worked because Stevenson got hot, which they want to do.
They made a lot of tough shots.
They did.
In the second. It was like playing Texas.
They just refused to run a real offense, and then they flopped. The entire game was just a flop fest. God. It was embarrassing.
It was a Big 12 official's dream. So many offensive fouls, illegal screens, charges. It was an offensive foul fest, and it certainly kept the game from feeling like it ever got into any kind of rhythm.
You had a question, though, because that was the one thing. Like, I don't want to watch this West Virginia team anymore. The other thing to me that stood out is right now, still, DeJuan Harris is the most important player KU has. And the player who is playing the best basketball right now is Kevin McCullough.
Yes.
He has been incredible, especially he's been an A++ on defense and about an A or A- on offense. He's been remarkable. You asked the question going into the show today, though, about Jalen Wilson and if there's any worry about what he's doing, if he's just kind of hit a wall, if teams have figuring him out, essentially just what's going on with him.
Is it a wall or is it just a scoring lull? Because I think now over his last 6 games, he's averaging something like 12 points per game. So, we got about a 3-week sample size that says he's not putting the ball in the basket at the level that he was early in the season when he was building his resume to be Big 12 Player of the Year, first team All-American. Is it just physical? Is he wearing down, or is it right now the scoring isn't there either because he's not finishing or shooting as well, or also because other guys are picking up the slack? You can look at it as a positive, right? That he has not had prolific offensive games, and KU hasn't needed him to be prolific offensively to win. Most notably that game, which one was he scored 2 points and they won?
Texas.
That was the
Big Monday.
Yeah, that was the Texas game. The other night it was the TCU game. It was Grady Dick had the big game. DeJuan Harris has had big games. McCullough has picked up a little bit of the scoring slack. So it's not, I don't think either way, a 5-alarm emergency, but certainly if Kansas is going to win a national championship, they are going to need more than 12 points a night from Jalen Wilson moving forward.
I would agree with that. I think this is more of a lull. I think this is more of, not that I have loved comparing the two of them all season long, even though there are some obvious comparisons. Ochai Agbaji was straight up like mediocre at the end of last season. He had an incredible year. He was shooting 32% from the floor over the last almost 4 weeks of the season last year. He hit a wall, and not to a degree, again, where you thought, oh my God, we can't rely on this guy. He was the most outstanding player of the Final Four. He had a great tournament, but it just got to a point where they had been riding him so much, it felt like it caught up with him a little bit. And he got a second wind at the very tail. Well, no, even on senior night, he didn't play very well, which was the last game of the year. He struggled a lot in that game. Then the Big 12 tournament rolled around, and KU just went nuclear from that point on to the rest of the season. I wonder if it is something similar with Wilson, that at some point you were riding him so hard for so long, and even after the Texas game, he had a couple of decent offensive games where you've just kind of hit a point where, hey, I'm going to be the role player, even if that's not an active assertion. But it's okay because you can live for now in regular season play with him scoring 12 a game, 10, 14, whatever, when Kevin McCullough is going nuts and DeJuan Harris is scoring 17 points. And you can live with that. I assume, and maybe this is just me being an optimistic homer, and that's fine if that's the case, but I assume we are going to see a different version of him when we get to the Big 12 tournament and a different version of him when we get to the NCAA tournament. That's my hope anyway. And that should be KU's hope too, because their best chance of getting back to the Final Four rests on him being your best offensive player. Shane Jackson, who covers KU for the Lawrence Journal World, he posted a couple resume comparisons on Twitter this morning of teams that have KU's resume and teams that have KU's predictive metrics similarly from recent years. Teams that have the resume that KU has this year, Final Four appearances, trips at least to the second weekend, a lot of successful teams, including like 3 of the last 4 KU teams too. In terms of the predictive metrics, a lot of teams that fizzled out in the Sweet 16 or got knocked off in the round of 32, which is interesting because I think KU's better than that. I think KU is easily a second weekend team, or should be anyway.
Yeah.
But you're going to need, if that's the case, and you can't just rely on, well, we're going to figure it out offensively, we're going to shoot our way out of it, whatever. You've got to rely on things like intangibles, grittiness, things like that. And Jalen Wilson's your number one dog, essentially. And DeJuan Harris has that dog in him. Kevin McCullough's got that. But Jalen Wilson's the leader of this team, and everyone knows that.
And over this stretch where the scoring has gone down, if there's one real positive thing to say about this, probably 3-week stretch of play, it's that when they needed him the most, he did grab the game by the scruff of the neck and take it over. That second half against Baylor, where he was really good.
Yeah.
And he helped them bring that game home. So I don't think it's anything to be alarmed about with Wilson, but I do think that, figuring on him to score 25, 30 points a game here down the stretch, that's probably not what KU can expect from him moving forward. But I also don't think that's what they need from him. I think if he can be, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 18 points a game with Harris's increased scoring, with McCullough's increased offensive confidence, they're going to be just fine. They're going to have plenty of weapons and plenty of balance, and they're going to be just fine going into the tournament.
Especially if he's still doing the other things that he has done well, running the floor in transition, rebounding. He's been a great rebounder really the last 2 years now. I'm not worried. If we get to a point where KU has this exact same game, self-compared at post-game to, hey, if this was a game for us against an 8 or a 9 seed in the second round of the tournament, we're going home, because there's a different element of that when there is true desperation, season on the line. The trailing team, the underdog team, may have been able to pull that out. If you have a repeat of this game and you beat Illinois or Michigan State or a team like that who's an 8 or a 9 seed in the second round, and you barely beat them and Jalen Wilson has an off night, then I'm probably feeling like, okay, maybe this just isn't going to turn around at this point. And that's not a referendum on his entire season, but that would make me a little bit concerned going into the second weekend. We've got one more hour to go on 580 Sports Talk today. We'll get you our 580 Sports Talk headlines. We'll talk some Royals baseball. We've got some Monday night best bets for you as well. We'll get to all that and much more coming up in the 5 o'clock hour of 580 Sports Talk. 1 hour to go on 580 Sports Talk. Brendan Dworzinski and Dan Lucero here with you for this final hour of the program today. Thank you so much for being a part of 580 Sports Talk with us on this final Monday of the month of February. We've got the 580 Prep High School Boys Basketball Coaches Club coming up at the top of the hour, a boys edition of the show as we get ready for Sub-State Hoops, which begins tonight for Care Paravel and schools in classes 2, 3, and 1A. Meanwhile, the rest of the city schools will get started either tomorrow or Wednesday. And our 580 Preps High School boys and girls basketball coverage will begin tomorrow night as well, 6 o'clock from Washburn Rural. And then immediately after that game for the 6A boys, we've got a 5A East girls tilt that Dan Lucero will have over at the pressure cooker at Highland Park. That is our 580 Preps Road to a Championship coverage coming up tomorrow night here on 580 WIBW, also Thursday and Friday night of Sub-State Week. Coming up here in this final hour of 580 Sports Talk, we'll get to our 580 Sports Talk headlines in just a matter of moments. We'll also get to some Kansas City Royals baseball. Did you see a final score, by the way, on the Royals spring training game?
I believe the last I checked, they were down 7-4. They ended up losing 10-4. I regret to inform our listeners that most of that late damage was done against Jackson Kowar, who gave up 3 runs in the 7th inning, including a homer.
I bet you he'd be an awesome accountant.
I don't know what he majored in at Florida, but it may be time to consider going pro in something other than sports for Jackson Kowar.
He would be so good at managing a high-class restaurant.
In all seriousness, like, spring training numbers, they really don't mean a thing, especially this early. Pitchers are just working on stuff, making sure their arms are okay. A lot of them will come out, not even throw breaking stuff, just get out there and just spin it a little bit. They're not trying to get nasty unless you're trying to make the team. Like, you're one of those real fringe cases who's like a do or die at the edge of the 40-man roster, and Kowar's not quite there yet, though it's coming. So I wouldn't fuss too bad about that unless he had good results, and then I'd say all herald the coming of Jackson Kowar, your new number 1 starter. Speaking of number 1 starters, Zach Greinke, 2 innings, scoreless, 1 hit allowed, 1 strikeout. And he had the pitch comm on his belt, signaling pitches in to MJ Melendez and not the other way around.
You know what? If anyone was going to get away with that in all of baseball, it's Zach Greinke. And no one's going to question it.
No.
Did you see the story the other day about him taking Daniel Lynch to his kid's school?
Yes.
He spent the night with his family in Arizona, and he was like, yeah, you're going to take my kids to school with me, and you're going to come in the building with me to drop them off. That is another instance, and we being the sports consuming public, use things like there will never be another, or they're one of a kind, or whatever. That's overused.
It is.
Tons and tons of times. This is for real, though. There has never been someone like Zach Greinke.
Yeah, and when he's gone, we're not getting another one.
No, and that for the best. Like, Zach Greinke should always get to be Zach Greinke.
The only Zach Greinke. Yeah.
I knew he wasn't going to retire because, like, there was talk about maybe he'll come back. Because when he's going to go, he's just not going to show up. Like, it'll get to February 27th next year. Does Zach Greinke sign anywhere? No, he's just gone. He's in Bermuda now. He just left. He dipped. He's doing his lawn care or whatever. He's just peacing out. That's how he's going to go.
He threw away his phone and lives off the grid.
He would be the happiest man on earth if he just threw away his phone. Does he have a phone? Does he text?
He really feels like he's probably a flip phone guy, but like, I can't confirm that. It feels like something that has been written about him in the past, but I honestly don't know.
He's got the only remaining T-Mobile Sidekick 2 in existence. That's what he's using as his phone. So we'll get to some Royals later on, and we will also get you some best bets for some sporting action coming up tonight as well. But right now, we've got to get to our 580 Sports Talk headlines. As always, they are brought to you by Blue Dot of Kansas. Go visit them online at bluedotkansas.com. Starting to get warm again. Got into the 60s today. Might get there tomorrow as well. As the temperature gets warmer, you're going to want to make sure your air conditioning is in the best shape it can be. and the folks at Blue Dot will make sure that is taken care of. Same with your heating, same with your plumbing. They'll take care of all of them together with their Peak Performance Safety Check. You can learn more about that and all of their services at their website, blue.kansas.com. First headline for me today, Dan, I'm going to go back to something that popped up on The Athletic the other day from Chiefs beat writer Nate Taylor, friend of the program, who wrote when he was breaking down the Chiefs roster about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and I will jump right to that. Perhaps the biggest question in the running backs group centers around what the Chiefs will do with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the 2020 first-round pick who has struggled in part because of injuries. The Chiefs are expected to decline the fifth-year option on Edwards-Helaire's contract, which makes him a logical candidate to be traded this offseason. If he is, the Chiefs could use a low-round draft choice to acquire another running back to pair with Pacheco, which would keep McKinnon in his role as the third down back. He wrote third round. I think that's a typo. I believe he means third down. Nate is a very good writer. He is very smart about the way he writes things. I mean, we've had him on the show plenty of times before. He's not the kind of guy who's going to say, oh, yeah, they're going to trade him just to say it. That, to me, says at least that has been considered, that has at least come up in his discussions with people who work with the Chiefs or are around the Chiefs. Not to say that it's for sure going to happen, but that it has at least come up. I'm not surprised they declined the fifth-year option. I think the emergence of Isaiah Pacheco clearly is more than just a secondary option at running back and as a clear number one made Edwards-Helaire more expendable. He's obviously the more expensive of the two. He's had injury concerns. McKinnon has been awesome in his role each of the last 2 years, especially down the stretch this year. If you need a third running back, which I assume the Chiefs will do, I think you use one of your late round picks, one of your 6th or 7th rounders to go get one again this year, pair him with Pacheco. I'm not saying Edwards-Helaire is for sure going to get traded. I would not be surprised if he was, though. It sucks for him because it felt in theory that year like it made a lot of sense, but he's never really been that receiving back, quasi slot receiver that we thought he could be. And that has kind of left him a man with no country on this roster.
Doesn't have a lot of explosiveness.
No. And that's the one thing that really kills it, because the other guys do. They're different kinds of explosiveness. Pacheco is, I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to run through your rib cage. Whereas McKinnon is more of that scat back, receiving third down kind of back that Nate wrote about and we've all seen. Clyde just doesn't have that. And even before the injuries, he didn't really have that. And that's tough.
Yeah, and I think the injuries cost him a chance to ever really get it. I think it's probably best for all parties. I mean, guy worked his tail off to get back healthy, try and participate in the playoffs. They activate him from IR, but they didn't put him on the active roster for the Super Bowl, and then he went to Fashion Week instead of the parade.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of tells you quite a bit about where the relationship right now is between team and player. And maybe that can be salvaged, maybe not. But if you're not going to pick up a fifth-year option on a running back, you may as well see if you can get a conditional pick.
Yeah.
I don't think you're doing a lot better than like a fifth, but
no, honestly, I would be surprised if it's even more than a 6th at this point. Someone will try it out with him, and we'll see if there's anything left. And if it doesn't work there, then it's probably going to be a fairly short career for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because running backs who flame out with 2 teams and don't have burst don't hang around for very long. Nothing against him. Whether it's with the Chiefs or elsewhere, I wish him the best. I just am assuming his next real chance to be the guy will be elsewhere.
And Brett Veach has a pretty great draft track record, and we can look past some of his mistakes, and it looks like this one is going to go down as a mistake. He's a first round pick on a guy that didn't make it to the 5th-year option, and that you ended up maybe having to trade for a 5th or a 6th round pick. That doesn't look real good. That's not, you can't put that in the win column, but it made a lot of sense. Like the thought process behind drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire was sound. Sometimes guys just don't produce, and it's not anyone's fault. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. And I feel like that's kind of where it was for a variety of reasons with Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
I agree with that 100%. It just happens sometimes. And, at the time, I know we all said this would be a luxury pick, and I think it was indeed a luxury pick. But, you can afford that when you are coming off of a Super Bowl. But I think that draft, and then certainly the next one, kind of ushered us into like Veach V2 almost, that it went from, well, now we can draft for need and we can plug holes and we can get luxuries. And it's now, what is where are any areas where we need improvement, and we are just going to hammer that over and over and over and over again. Of course, was the offensive line 2 years ago. Last year, we didn't know it at the time, but it was the secondary that, hey, we are going to build for the future right now and get all these guys who are future pieces. They built their secondary of the future in one draft. And now maybe it's running back or somewhere else. It happens sometimes.
First Blue Dot of Kansas headline for me, the AP College Basketball Top 25 released earlier today. No movement in the top 5, despite the 5th-ranked team in the country losing at home. Purdue stays 5th. UCLA remains 4th after surviving a scare in Boulder against Colorado. KU remains 3rd, although they did get more first-place votes this week than the 2nd-ranked team in the country, Alabama. 8 first-place votes for Kansas, just 5 for the Crimson Tide. 49 first-place votes for your reigning number 1, Houston, who remains at the top of the poll for the 2nd straight week. Outside of the top 5, lots of upheaval. Marquette is 6th, Baylor 7th, Arizona 8, Texas 9, and Gonzaga into the top 10 at number 10. K-State is up 3 spots. They are now number 11 in the country. Tennessee, Virginia, UConn, and Indiana round out the top 15. 16 through 20, Miami, St. Mary's, San Diego State, Xavier, and Providence. And the final 5, Maryland, TCU, Kentucky, Texas A&M, and Pitt, ranked for the first time in 7 years.
Good for Pitt. They lead the ACC.
Yeah,
after
out of
Miami
nowhere.
Gagged one away this weekend.
Yeah, Miami, I think Nigel Pack's hurt.
That's tough.
I think he's been hurt, and I think they've been missing him. Pitt ranked 21-8. They were miserable. They've been miserable pretty much ever since Jamie Dixon left.
Yeah.
But they have certainly turned some things around. Kentucky, I think, is back in the poll. I want to say they're back in. Yes, they were out for 7 weeks, and they are back in. Maryland jumped back in at number 21. Iowa State no longer ranked. They've spent the bulk of the year in the top 25, but they've now lost 3 straight, including an inexplicable bad home loss. Well, it is explicable. They're out of gas. They're cooked. That's the explicable part of Iowa State's home loss to Oklahoma on Saturday. But they are out of the top 25. Creighton also out of the top 25.
Man, I still think Creighton has the ability to go on a run. They looked at Maui like they were going to be a Final Four shoe-in. They looked incredible. Them in Arkansas.
Yeah. And they dealt with some injuries. They lost Kalkbrenner, their big kid, in the middle for a time, and I know that has hurt them. The metrics love them. I'll tell you this. If I'm a number 1 seed and they're my 8,
would not like it.
I would not be thrilled.
Having lived through that, I would not like to see it again, nor did I like to see it the first time.
And by the way, that's who Jerry Palm on CBS has. Great. Is KU number 1 and Creighton number 8 in the same bracket.
I don't ever want to see Arthur Kaluma ever again. Do not ever put him in my vicinity ever again.
He had a filthy dunk the other day.
Yeah, he did. By the way, speaking of teams that had a lot of hype going into the year or early in the season that have petered out, this is the first week all season Illinois has not received a vote in the poll. They were horrible against a bad Ohio State. I watched that entire game because, of course, I bet on it. And I've been an Illinois fan my whole life. I grew up around that program. They are miserable to watch. Like, that team, talent and coaching wise, should be a top 4 seed. And yet all year they've played these games where they just look uninterested. Like, they should have wiped the floor with Ohio State. They are horrible.
Yeah, Ohio State's awful.
They are just horrible. By the way, here's a fun fact for you. So Marquette, number 6 in the poll this week. The last time they were inside the top 8, because they peaked at number 8 in their Final Four year with Dwayne Wade.
With Dwayne Wade, yeah.
The last time they were inside the top 8 was March 6th of 1978.
They won the national title that year, didn't they?
I believe you are correct about that. The number 1 song in the country that year, the Billboard number 1 song that week, was Love is Thicker Than Water by Andy Gibb. The previous week, the number 1 song was Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. That's
so it's been a while, is what you're telling me.
Yeah,
by the way,
a hot minute.
It was 77. I had to look it up, but it was 77. They won the national championship. Al McGuire is the head coach. The next year, I don't know what happened to Marquette, but they didn't go to the Final Four. Kentucky won it all in 78.
Yeah, that was the last time Marquette was inside the top 8 in the country.
Marquette was upset in round 1 by Miami of Ohio that year.
Oh no. Go Red Hawks. Although they had a different name at that time.
Yeah, they did.
Both those teams had different names at that time.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did.
It's very funny in that 70s show. They visit Marquette at one point, and they have Golden Eagles banners up. I thought, that is not historically accurate. That is not quite correct. Next headline for me and our 580 Sports Talk headlines brought to you by Blue Dot of Kansas. How about a little NBA news for you? This is from Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report. There are so many guys who do report like NBA reports. Like in the NFL, there's like 6 guys. There's Schefter, Rappaport, Matt Verderame reports some stuff we talked about earlier today. He's not as much of a news breaker as those guys, but occasionally. NBA, there's like 900 people who break stories.
Right.
I'm like, who is this guy? He has 400 Twitter followers, but he was spot on about some sort of acquisition. Like, where do these people come from? Anyway, Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report has a column up, really a notebook of sorts, about just some future business side stuff for the NBA, about how the Bally Sports Regional Sports Network crisis may lead to some sort of disaster for some teams. But the headline of that section is, could that lead to fewer games in the season overall? More national games, fewer local games, whatever it might end up being. Is the NBA going to expand at some point? And also potential rules changes for the NBA. How about this for you, Dan? Per several sources, next season's most likely rule change will enable coaches to keep their challenge if it is successful. The primary concern is keeping games at roughly 2 hours and 15 minutes. While challenges may average 90 seconds, they can spike to upwards of 6 minutes or longer. No one wants to watch that. You know, the whole baseball pace of play thing. NBA, similar thing. No one wants to sit and watch referees staring at a TV monitor for 6 minutes. Here's the follow-up, though. Another potential change could be the use of a target score, but just for overtime, also known as the Elam ending, or a version of that. The G League has experimented with that rule in overtime during the regular season and for fourth quarters during their winter showcase in Las Vegas. So essentially how that would work is, okay, this game went to overtime. It's 110 to 110. First team to 120 wins. However they determine what the final number is, plus 10, plus 7, whatever. That's how they would determine that. According to another tweet I saw on, and it's also in the story here, that would prevent overlong broadcasts. Why would any fan care about ESPN's broadcast window? And overloading player minutes. I cannot possibly groan loud enough about that. And he specifically puts, like Los Angeles Clippers forward Kawhi Leonard playing 46 minutes in a double OT loss to the Kings on Friday. He then played the full game against the Nuggets last night.
Yeah, he did. He played great. He was awesome. He was their best player by far.
He's paid $1 jillion. They don't play more than a couple back-to-backs the entire season. They can play more often. And I get, well, we want to save ourselves for the postseason. One, then don't play a regular season. Just play a gigantic best-of-3 series tournament for the whole year and just say, forget the regular season. We had the same discussion about baseball and the ghost runner rule the other day, or a week or two ago, right? About how if you're telling me you don't care about the regular season, why am I supposed to care about the regular season? Kawhi Leonard can handle playing 2 games in 3 days. He can. I know for a fact he can. Also, 46 minutes in double overtime, he's still got, what would that be? 4, 8. Oh, how long is overtime? 5 minutes or 4?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So that's 10. That's still 12 minutes of rest. That's fine. Plus TV timeouts, plus the halftime break. That's fine. Give me a break.
The NBA has a problem.
Yes.
When it comes to teams and players it's called load management. And it is a problem for the league. It is, because the league is, on the one hand, promoting these big matchups and in national TV games, big stars, big matchups, and then they'll come around in January and February, and you got a player being load managed and he doesn't play. or a team's going to hold out all their guys. Like, this isn't new. The Spurs, notably, were like the progenitors of this. They used to they'd sit Duncan and they'd sit Ginobili and they'd sit Parker in like a second game of a back-to-back. They'd already won the first night. They knew they were going to win their 55 games. So, all right, fine. We'll punt this, trip to Utah or whatever it might be. But it is a problem for the game because that's how you sell the regular season, right? Is these games matter because our best players are playing in them. And if your best players don't play in them, then how can you convince your fans that they matter? How do you convince your fans to tune in for the regular season if your players and your franchises aren't valuing it? So what the problem that the NBA needs to address is, how do we incentivize teams and players to play? And the response from the players is, look, man, 82 games is a lot. 82 games in this in a compressed time frame where you're flying all over the country, and sometimes you've got the back-to-back at altitude, right? Like, that's always a killer. When you've got to go, when you're like the Hornets and you got to fly to Utah and play one night, and then the next night you're in Denver. Like, that's an auto loss. Like, it doesn't matter how good you might be. That is an automatic loss. Denver and Utah have feasted at home on those games for years. I'm not complaining. I'm just pointing out how it is.
Yeah.
So it's a hard schedule, and it is very demanding for guys who play a lot of basketball and who, for their whole lives, more so than the players coming up in the 70s and the 80s, even in the 90s, have played so much basketball, so much travel and competitive basketball in their lives, hundreds of games on the AAU circuit a year. Like, it takes a toll on these guys' bodies. And you see the injuries that guys like Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and Kawhi Leonard, some of the injuries that these guys have had to deal with over the course of their career, I totally understand. They might only have 60 games in the tank. So, yeah, the playoffs are the more important of the games. Make sure you have those guys right for the playoffs, right for your tournament. That's great, but it does hurt your regular season. And the regular season is the bulk of your product. So, the NBA's got to figure out what exactly it wants to do about that, because would shortening the season and giving players more rest just in general be better for the product? Absolutely it would. You know what the proof is? This weekend. They had a week off for the All-Star game, and the games this weekend were all bangers. And all the stars played against each other. Clippers Nuggets was a banger. Lakers Mavericks, great game. Celtics Sixers, awesome game. Because their guys were all playing against each other and they all were rested. But it's a non-starter to say, oh, we'll only play 66 regular season games or whatever it is. Because, okay, you shorten the season by 14 games. You think the owners are going to give up 7 home dates? No.
Especially when they already are running the risk of, we might end up with a worse gate because fans do not, you're the Bucks. We do not know. Mike Budenholzer might sit Giannis tonight. He played 45 minutes last night. He might sit tonight. We might have a bad gate. And fans take that into account. And I used to be on the side of, well, who cares? The NBA is a business. Fans are there as like a side thing, but the NBA is a business. And, if they want to rest their players, fine. I've swung back the other way now, where I now say, look, you've got to make it mean something. Like, the entire NBA season up until the very, very end of the regular season is just a lot of players kind of indicating they don't really care about what the regular season means. And that's fine, but there needs to be a change there. Like, this year's All-Star game was the epitome of that. Like, those guys weren't. That was a sham. Come on, that was a joke. Many of these regular season games are a joke. Last night, awesome basketball all over the place.
Yeah, like,
give me 2 Sundays from now, it's probably going to be the polar opposite.
Yeah, like, if Celtics Sixers, I didn't watch a ton of that game, but I watched, bits and pieces. Timberwolves Warriors last night was really good. That was the lead into Clippers Nuggets. Clippers Nuggets was terrific. I mean, if you don't like those games with these high level players going at it, then it may be something about basketball, just the sport of basketball in general you don't like. I don't know what to tell you, but you're not getting that on a night in, night out basis. Like, the Nuggets are going to go to Houston. Nuggets play Houston next. Houston's the worst team in the league. Jamal Murray's not even get on the airplane. He was dealing with a little bit of back tightness, and the Nuggets are going to say, you know what, the heck with it. Just stay home. And, I mean, that's one thing because he's got, like, a legitimate injury he's battling through. But, like, what if they decided, Nikola Jokic, why don't you stay home too? We think we can beat these guys with both hands tied behind our back. Like, not only is that bad for the TV product, that's bad for your fans who, they might only get one shot to see a team come through their city each year. And if their best guy's not going to play, like, God, it happens a lot now. You know, you want to see LeBron play, or you want to see Steph Curry play, or you want to see KD play, and you might not get to, but not because they're hurt. I mean, injuries, again, stuff happens.
Yeah.
But the load management, it's a problem for the NBA. And I don't think the Elam ending in overtime, that doesn't solve anything. Shorter broadcast windows, who gives a damn?
Like, too many sports leagues at this point. I think baseball and the NBA are the victims of this the most. They change things that people don't care about. Like, I know there's been a lot of talk about the pitch clock, and some people are in favor of it, some not. You know, okay, fine. So many things come up that, oh, well, you can do this or this or that. No one cares. Stop over legislating things. Just play basketball, play baseball.
But here, the underlying reason for it is this: like, you and I are sports fans, and if you're listening to this show, you're a sports fan too. You have no problem sitting down and turning on the TV and devoting as much of your time and energy as it takes to see the beginning, the middle, and the end of whatever game it is that you want to watch, whether it's the Chiefs or it's KU basketball or the Royals or whatever it is. You watch the beginning, you watch the end, you sit down, you pay it your attention because you care about it. You're invested in that. That's how you consume sports. Young people do not consume sports that way and are not watching sports on television, like noticeably are watching less sports on TV. And I'm not talking about like 18 to 25. I'm talking like kids. Kids are not watching sports. And the people who are in charge of these billion-dollar industries that would like to continue to make money, print money as it goes,
they're terrified.
They've got to figure out how to get those, 12-year-olds to become the kinds of fans that we are today. Because if that doesn't happen, that's a big problem for their business model. So if it feels like the professional sports leagues are kowtowing a little too much to the youths, that's because they need them and they're losing them, particularly the NBA.
Any other headlines for you today?
No, it's a good place to end it.
Let's get to a commercial breakdown. Thanks, as always, to Blue Dot for sponsoring our 580 Sports Talk headlines. You can find them online at blue.kansas.com. We'll get to a quick break. We'll talk some Royals baseball next on 580 Sports Talk. Did you see that KU announced the first step of their football complex renovations this afternoon?
Yes, it did.
Much needed. Desperately needed. It's good. They put the stipulation in Lance Leipold's contract. He can get out with no penalty if they don't start improving things by the end of the year. So good to see some positive momentum in that regard. New renderings look pretty cool. It's going to be a very nice facility. And, well, it needs to be a lot better. The Kansas City Royals, they were in action earlier today. Spring training-wise, they lost. That doesn't really mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. But I saw an interesting column, at least I thought it was interesting, from Sam McDowell of the Kansas City Star this weekend about the fit for Matt Quatrero and this new group of, important people with the Royals, front office personnel, etc. And I found it interesting because we've spent a lot of time talking about the baseball stuff that is going to be different going forward, or we expect to be different going forward, the way they handle pitchers and the way they approach pitching in general and the way they handle batters and what they want to do offensively and how they want to accomplish things, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked a lot about the actual baseball parts of all of that. But this piece was about how Matt Quatrero fits with the guys. It was about Mike Matheny and why things weren't working. And, we heard rumors as far back as late May, early June last year about discontent in the clubhouse. And some of that was flushed out when the Royals moved guys. You look at a Whit Merrifield as an example of that. I think the trip to Toronto was really an inflection point for last year that, okay, the old guard's not working. Like we've got to move on, and we've got to move on now. And they've done more of that this year. They've moved on from, Michael A. Taylor wasn't around for all that long, but they moved on from him. Adalberto Mondesi is still young, but he's been around for a long time. They moved on from him. This is such a new group, new locker room. And one of the players even said, I like Mike Matheny as a person, but his approach did not work. And McDowell wrote about how he was much more drill sergeant than he was friend. And
he's an old school baseball guy.
Very much. And he even said, look, this isn't intended to be a critique of Matheny. And he even tried at the end of last year to loosen things up and to encourage guys to play their own music and to show their personality more. But it didn't work. That's not his demeanor. That's not his nature. And we know by August of last year, it was over. That specific run was toast. It was dead in the water. I'm curious how much this can impact, or a positive shift in culture, in, again, quote unquote fit, how much that can impact this team right now in terms of wins and losses. Because I do think in some ways that can help a team. That can propel a team to more wins, to more success. I look to my favorite team. They brought Joe Madden in as supposed to be, hey, he's great with young players. He's a good baseball guy, a good mix of new and old school. It's going to work. And the culture improved. The Cubs were really good. They had all these young players. It took off. I think that can make an impact, but you need the right mix of talent and culture. Do the Royals have enough of that having these better fits and these more open, personable guys can actually lead to more wins and losses in the short term? Or is that more of a long-term play?
So when I look at this young group of Royals position players, Pasquantino and Witt in particular, but I think also, MJ Melendez is part of that conversation as well.
Mm-hmm.
I see a core group of players capable of being the culture setters. I think that sometimes you bring in a manager, and Joe Madden's a great example of this. Like, you bring in a manager who will allow the players to create their own culture, and we'll just kind of ride the wave. Go with the flow, go with the vibe, manage the game in the way that he needs to manage it, but just having his finger on the pulse of the clubhouse. And then you have other managers who you hire when you want them to instill a culture. And those tend to be more of your old school guys. And I think Mike Matheny is one of those guys.
For sure.
Couldn't help but be, considering the guys that he played with.
Yeah, it was just in his nature.
Or played for, I should say. Like, he's a Tony La Russa acolyte. So there was always going to be some similarities there between the way La Russa handled the clubhouse and the way that Mike Matheny handled the clubhouse. And I think if we learned anything from the last couple of years of Tony La Russa in Chicago, it's that the way Tony La Russa handled the clubhouse is not a way you can really handle a clubhouse to a great level of success in the 2020s. Like, the game is different now. The players are different now. And I think you do have to be a little bit more, to say permissive doesn't feel quite right, but you do need to let the players have a little bit more input on what the culture is. And I think that the Royals do have young talent that is capable of being good influences on the players behind them and setting a positive culture, getting the Royals on a positive track in the long haul. Matt Quatraro, there's a piece on him today. I believe Rustin Dodd wrote it at The Athletic, former Kansas City Star writer. Matt Quatraro is a Grateful Dead guy. And I didn't know that about him. But when I learned that about him, that told me everything I needed to know about like the kind of vibe that he's going to have. And I don't mean that like that kind of
you'd be smoking in the locker room.
Yeah, I don't mean that kind of Grateful Dead fan. I don't mean like Bill Walton necessarily, but just, a go with the flow kind of vibe and the ability to to form a communal culture. In a way that everybody kind of has input on, instead of being the my way or the highway kind of red ass that frankly the Royals have had as their manager for the better part of a decade plus.
It's a long time.
Yeah, Ned Yost was that kind of guy. Before him, Trey Hillman was that kind of guy, and Buddy Bell was that kind of guy. But like those guys, that was the kind of guy you had as your manager for a long, long time in this game. And now you look at the managers who are more successful, they don't have that red ass in them. They're not that kind of manager. And I think that having a different voice in the dugout, a different personality in the dugout, it can be really helpful, I think, for young players to be able to spread their wings a little bit and figure out who they're going to be as pros.
I mean, now even a guy like Dusty Baker's kind of, he is an old school guy, but he's even kind of like that. I mean, he's never been a stifle your personality kind of manager.
He wears wristbands. He still wears wristbands. Like any minute he'll pinch hit.
Yeah.
Like he still thinks like a player.
And I think for the Royals specifically, it can make a positive impact because those guys, we've gotten to see that personality out of the next core of Royals, right? Like we've seen Bobby Witt have fun. Vinny Pasquantino's all over Twitter making jokes and
rooting for the
fun.
Jets and doing his whole thing.
Yeah, I mean that you want more of that. You want those guys to be able to make things feel like light and fun. And they've had that with Sal for forever at this point.
Yeah.
But over the last couple of years, how much of that has there been for this team?
Not much.
I mean, none of it.
Been pretty grim. It's been pretty, like the guys setting your tone in your clubhouse are Whit Merrifield types, set your jaw and do your job.
Yeah. And, Whit had some fun with Bobby Witt when he first came up, but, and Singer too. Merrifield and Singer kind of had a thing going on, but that wasn't like, oh man, this is a trend setting kind of thing. That was just, some jokes back and forth. This feels like it's something different. Now, I don't know if that's going to lead to more wins and losses, but I take that back. I don't know if it will directly lead to more wins, but I have a feeling it will prevent more losses.
It'll be more fun to root for. Like, I really do think that this young position core is going to be fun to watch develop in a way that maybe it hasn't been real fun to watch Royals baseball the last half a decade. And that I don't say that and say, that I just assume because the pitching's got to catch up. Otherwise, it's not going to contend. But like, it'll be fun to watch Vinny and to watch Bobby and to watch MJ and those guys spread their wings a little bit and play hard for each other.
I hope it makes an immediate difference. I do think long term it does. I think over the scope of the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I think we will be able to clearly see an uptick in how much that has impacted the team positively. I'm just not sure if it will impact them right now, because I don't know if there's enough pieces there to really be able to get the most out of it.
I would love for it to impact us in the sense that I would love to have more baseball to talk about through June, July, August. That'd be great.
I would like for the Royals to not be a complete, oh my God, turn off the radio topic by May 15th. Like that would be nice because I know for some of you that has been the case. Oh my God, when did the Chiefs come back? Can we talk more Chiefs? Can we talk more about anything else? I understand. I also do not want that. We'll get to another commercial break. We've got some Monday night best bets for you coming up next on 580 Sports Talk. pair of Big 12 games on the schedule coming up tonight. West Virginia taking on Iowa State. I'm not going to watch that game. I have no desire to watch either of those two teams play basketball at this point.
Yeah, like West Virginia's not fun to watch, and Iowa State, again, they feel like they're on fumes.
Baylor, Oklahoma State's got a little more intrigue to me. That's my best bet of the day. I took Baylor -1.5. Some books have actually moved that to just a single point favoring Baylor. I got it at 1.5. I'm going to keep it right there. I like Baylor in that spot. I know it's on the road. I don't really trust Oklahoma State at this point. The one thing, similarly to what we said about them playing K-State on Friday, if Oklahoma State wants to win, they've got to be great in the paint. That's where they can take advantage of Baylor. But if they let those Baylor guards get hot, and Baylor can beat anybody.
Doesn't sound like Keontae George is going to play,
which is concerning.
And if he doesn't play, like Baylor beat Texas without him, and they deserve a ton of credit for that. Like Flagler and Cryer got going, and that's big. But they also got a huge game from Jalen Bridges. They got two big shots down the stretch from Dale Bonner. And Flo Thomas, probably best game of the season. Do I think all three of those things are going to happen again against a now even more desperate Oklahoma State team in Stillwater? Do I think Oklahoma State's going to shoot 5 for 23 from three again, or 5 for 21, like they did against K-State? I like Oklahoma State to win tonight. Their money line right now, -102. I'm on that. My
question is, because I totally understand the logic. My question is, where does the desperation tilt into you're just not very good? Is Oklahoma State at that point?
Ask me at the buzzer.
Okay,
ask me when the final buzzer sounds at Gallagher-Iba. No, because I think, the concern with Oklahoma State, obviously, is without Avery Anderson, they just haven't seemed to have that backcourt fulcrum. And Bryce Thompson's playing through an injury, and I don't think he was real great against Kansas State on Saturday. He's kind of playing through a hamstring injury. But Oklahoma State should have just a significant paint advantage with Moussa Cisse and Caleb Boone. And if they make their threes, and generally they're a decent shooting team, certainly better than they were against Kansas State. And I just think there'll be a little bit of positive regression for Oklahoma State and some negative regression for Baylor coming off the emotional high of a big win at home. They don't have anything in the league to play for right now. I think it's a letdown spot for Baylor without Keontae George.
Is that number one game you're focusing on this night?
Yes.
This night, tonight, or are there any other games that you've got an eye on?
Did you know the postseason starts tonight? The conference tournament action in the Atlantic Sun.
The Sun starts tonight. That's right.
Florida Gulf Coast +1.5 against Queens University. That game is in a neutral site, and Florida Gulf Coast is just playing better.
Queens just moved up to Division I. I don't think they're even postseason eligible, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's correct.
So they can play in their conference tournament, but I don't believe even if they made a run, they'd be able to play.
Also miserable in the pick and roll defense. Florida Gulf Coast thrives on the pick and roll.
You've been scouting a lot of Queens basketball?
I've decided to really dive into the conference tournaments this year.
Okay.
And try and be an expert.
We were talking about it the other day, and it came up again earlier in the office today. Dan and I have really kind of glommed onto one small major conference each.
Yes.
Like I've gotten really into the America East, and you've done a lot of West Coast Conference.
Big on the
watching.
West Coast Conference, yeah.
Yeah.
Considering I owe my life in a very literal sense to Pepperdine basketball.
That's fair enough. When does the WCC tournament start?
March 2nd.
March 2nd.
They've got like the sicko, like every round you get a bye.
Okay. There's two ways to think about this. There's the new school and the old school. The old school is, this is stupid. This is dumb as hell. Just play a regular tournament. The new school is, well, actually, if you're a small major, that makes sense because it's a better chance of getting your favorite or your best team into the tournament. The way it works, Gonzaga and St. Mary's have a bye to the semifinals of the tournament.
Yes.
Every round is just 2 games, and then the winner of round 1 plays the team that got a bye through the first round.
So you have your pigtail games, 7, 10, and 8, 9, and then those winners play the 5 and the 6. The winners of those games play the 3 and the 4. The winner of those games play the 1 and the 2 in the semifinals. So, yeah, like a quadruple bye for Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Gonzaga, by the way, is number 1 seed. That tie was broken by net rating because they were 1-1 against each other, Gonzaga and St. Mary's in the regular season.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a tiebreaker.
Well, the first tiebreaker's head-to-head. They were 1-1. The second tiebreaker is who'd you lose to? They both lost to Loyola Marymount. And then the third tiebreaker is net rating.
Huh.
And Gonzaga has the edge. So Gonzaga's the number 1 seed.
How about that? Conference tournament play starts tonight. Can't wait for it. We'll take one more timeout. Excuse me. I'm super tongue-tied here at the end of the show. We'll take a quick timeout. We've got the final word after this on 580 Sports Talk. Wrapping up this Monday edition of 580 Sports Talk with the final word before we get to the 580 Preps Coaches Club. Dan.
One more shout out to Kansas State for what I thought was a mental toughness win in Stillwater on Saturday. They showed me a tremendous amount of mental fortitude coming back from 8 points down, the way they closed that game out, the way they executed, the way they shot the ball down the stretch, the way they defended. I thought that was a really, really good win. Kansas State officially has their second wind, I should say, and it might end up earning them a second seed, a number 2 seed in the NCAAs.
My final word is that it is always a little different, and I don't go to KU games as a fan, quote unquote, very often because, well, I'm normally working when I go to them, covering them for the radio station. But I went with my wife and my in-laws on Saturday, and man, it really is a special environment when that place is rocking and loud, and it is a lot more fun to be able to yell at the officials and talk about how trash Eric Stevenson's defense is when I'm not trying to be quiet and say it under my breath and be a professional in Section 13A. Much prefer being able to say words that I cannot say on the FCC airwaves. That's a whole lot more fun. Coming up on the show tomorrow from 3 until 6, we'll get more Chiefs offseason preview to get to. The NFL.com crew, by the way, put out their list of the top 101 free agents in the NFL. How many might the Chiefs be interested in? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about all things Kansas basketball with Michael Swain and so much more. That's tomorrow from 3 to 6. But until then, for Dan Lucero, I'm Brendan Dworzinski. You've been listening to 580 Sports Talk. The 580 Preps High School Basketball Coaches Club is next.